This video was sponsored by Treblle.com. What's up YouTube, this is Dennis Panuta for tutorials.eu. I'm super excited to teach you to become a full stack developer, because what we're going to do in this video is first of all build an API using ASP.NET and C# and then upload it to Azure so that we can consume it then using an Android application that we're going to build with Kotlin and Jetpack Compose. So you're going to learn the latest technologies and all of that, also using a very powerful tool called Treblle, which is also the sponsor of this video. More about them in a bit. And the cool thing is you are going to really build the entire stack. So backend as well as front end. And actually, I think it's like this, backend and front end. So we're going to do all of that, but there are some requirements. So you should know C#. A little bit of experience in ASP.NET is definitely going to be helpful, as well as, well, if you want to do the front end part, you should know Kotlin as well, because we're doing that. And if you don't know any of these things, don't worry, we have a bunch of videos on this channel. So a full C# course if you want to learn about that, an ASP course that we have also on this channel, you can learn about that. And then we also have a entire Kotlin basics course, as well as a Kotlin Jetpack Compose course. So a bunch of courses all on this channel for free. Check them out, hit a like as well as subscribe if you haven't done so already, because, well, this helps us out to create these kind of videos. And this video was only possible through the sponsorship by Treblle, because this is not a course that we're selling anywhere. This is simply a 3.5 hours long free course that teaches you so many things along the way. And this is not the only part that we are working with an API. There will be a second video where we are building an application in Unity, which will actually be a game in Unity, also consuming an API and using Treblle in order to understand better what's going on with our API. With all of that out of the way, let's get started building the API using Visual Studio, C# and ASP.NET. All right, so let's get started with the actual project. Therefore, you need to make sure that you have your Visual Studio installer set up the right way. So therefore, go to your Visual Studio installer, modify your Visual Studio version, and go here to your individual components and check the same that I have here, specifically in ASP.NET. Here, make sure that you have the .NET Framework project item templates selected. And in general, you can just select everything the same way that I have here, just to make sure that it's going to work the same way for you. So these are the .NET desktop development, even though you will not need them in this video. And then I also had a .NET Native and Framework SDK for 4.7.2. and the advanced ASP.NET features. So once you have installed all of them, you can launch Visual Studio and then create a new project. And there you will find the ASP.NET Web Application .NET Framework. So you can also search for ASP.NET Web Application. It has to be specifically this one with the C# logo here. Otherwise, things are going to look differently and then you might get confused. But if you use the same one that I do, you should be fine. So let's create a project called Treblle demo, for example, and select Web API here, as well as individual accounts here in authentication. Okay, everything else can stay default, and then click on create. All right, now let's look at what we have between our hands. We have a new Web API project with the type of auth that we selected, which was the authentication for individuals, and it already contains a basic setup for user management with some endpoints ready to use. To test the APIs, we will use a software called Postman. It will mimic how your API is going to be used once it's deployed. So you see, once you have this project ready, there are a bunch of folders and files already in our project. So you see a bunch of them. Okay, now the next thing that we're going to require is going to be Postman. So I would recommend to go to postman.com/downloads and download the 64-bit version. And once it has been downloaded and started, it will show you something like this, even though it might ask you to register or sign in, but you can also click just move on without registering, which will be fine, and it's going to send you to the screen here. Okay, before we do anything with that, let's run our project. And this should then open up Chrome for you or whatever extension or browser that you're using. And you should get this screen here where you can then click on your APIs at the very top. So this is the web application that we have built so far, and it's our web API help page that we open up with this approach. So you can see here, for example, that you have an get API account user info, then you have the post API account logout. So for example, this would be posted or executed once you want to log out or once the user wants to log out, and so forth. So you have some gets and post requests here, as well as some values. So as I stated earlier, this video wouldn't be possible without Treblle. So let's look at what Treblle even is, because we're going to use it later on, but I wanted to introduce it a little earlier in the video so that you get a feel for it already. So Treblle helps you to stay in tune with your APIs, and Treblle makes it super easy to understand what's going on with your APIs and the apps that use them. And this is so important. So let's have a look at the promo video. This will give you an idea of what Treblle has to offer. And the cool thing is there is a forever free plan. So you can test it and use it extensively even without having to pay anything. Not even a credit card is required. So definitely check out the link in the description and register for Treblle using that link, because this will help us to see who came via us. So now let's have a look at their video.
Jeff, a backend developer working on APIs, collaborates with mobile devs, front-end devs, and product managers to launch apps. Jeff's basically MVP and the most experienced on the team. Obviously, he's in high demand. Jeff doesn't mind helping out, but with every API, there's documentation to be written, error reports to investigate, team members to coordinate, and a constant bombardment of questions. It's a bit much, but everything changes when Jeff is recommended Treblle. Boom! Jeff can now see all requests in real time. Response data, user location, device information, all grouped, while Treblle generates full documentation with OpenAPI spec. Jeff can search and filter any data, recreate tests for previous requests, and instantly access an API quality score with continued API analytics. The best part is Jeff can invite team members to Treblle so they can witness the magic. Doesn't have to carry the team anymore. Still MVP.
All right, so I guess you can imagine how much time this can save you and how much of a hassle it reduces in your workflow. So I know that this is a beginner course for developers who want to learn full stack development, but this is a great starting point. And if you know already somebody who has, well, who's working with APIs, definitely pull them aside and tell them about Treblle, because this is going to make their lives better. Okay, so now let's get back to the video. So let's look at how to register specifically. So post API account register. So once we click on this, we will see that we have an email, a password, and a confirm password. So these will be the body parameters that we have. They are of type string, all of them, and they are required. And then you can also see the data type, even though confirm password is not required, as you see, but it has the, well, I would recommend it. And then we have the request formats. So this would be the example of such a request in the form of JSON. So this is a JSON object where we have three properties: email, password, and confirm password, with a value in each of them. All right, so how can we make sense of this? So first we need to know our URL, which we are going to use to access our APIs. In Visual Studio, if we open our web API config file, which you can find under app start, there you will find your URL, which is the root template. So API/controller/ID, which means if you want to access any method, we will use API, which is fixed, followed by the slash, as well as the controller name that we want to use, as well as the IDs. So you should have a general idea what a controller is. So we will use the register method in our account controller. It's a post method, so we will select that. So you can go over to your account controllers here, and there you will find a bunch of code, and one of them will be to register. Okay, so here, this is the change password method, set password method, add external login, and let me just search for register here. Okay, next one. So there we are. So this is the async task, which is a method that will run asynchronously, which allows us to register, which is going to be the name of our controller. So it will be API/account/register. Okay, so let's go over to Postman and then click on create a request. Then we enter our URL. So it would be https://localhost, and then the ID that I had in my case. So let me see, it was 44336, like this, /API/account/register. So here I'm going to select post because I want to run a post request, and I can go over to the body and I'm gonna select raw here. And here I'm going to send my JSON code. So this is, for example, the JSON code that I'm going to use. So a curly bracket with an email being bb3@gmail.com, then the password being this, what you can see here, as well as the confirm password. And that would pretty much be how we want our body to look like. So our JSON. And if you recall, this pretty much looks the same as what we saw here. So we have email, password, confirm password, and we're using something very similar here. And now if we click send, then we get the response. Could not get response. That's because we have SSL verification activated. So we can deactivate it or disable it, and then we will get a response here. So that's the body response that we're gonna get. Message the request entities media, text plain is not supported, and so forth. Basically, we get unsupported media type here as our response. And then once you click send, you will see that this is the body that we get. It says unsupported media type. And that is because by default, text is selected and we need to select the JSON. So this is JSON code that we want to send to this post URL. So let's run it again. And this time it's a bad request. The request is invalid. It's already taken. So you see, I've run it before. So this account has already been created. So let me create another account called bb4@gmail. And there we are. So now we have a header of 200 OK, which is the standard response for a successful HTTP request, which means the user has been registered. So now we have two users in our database, one being bb4 and one being bb3. Okay, let's now try to log into our application. So we try to register, but now we need to log into the same account. So how you can do that is you enter token. So this time it will be a GET request. So we want to register with our user, and therefore we need to select the XWW form URL encoded here. So we need to enter a key, which will be the grant type and the value of password. Description can be empty. Then we have the username key with bb3@gmail.com, for example, the one that we had set up, and the password, which was this. Let me copy it because I don't want to run into a problem here typing in the wrong password, and there was an @ at the beginning. So this will be our user login data. So the controller that we're using is going to be called token this time. Okay, we're logging in using the token. So we can either use a get or a post, and this will pass the email and password. So now let's click send, and we get 200 OK within 144 milliseconds. So you see, we have an access token. So this is going to be the token. It's a very long string. The taken type is Bera. It expires in quite some time. This is the username, and that's when it was issued. So the token was issued. This token will be expire in 14 days. So it means that we are going to be logged in for 14 days, so to speak. So this token is, so to speak, our authorization. For any request that requires the user to be logged in, we will use this token to prove that we are both registered and logged in. In some apps, these tokens expire very quickly, and when that happens, you will need to refresh it. Otherwise, you will be automatically logged out. We don't have to worry about this because using our Android frontend will save the token locally, and we will keep using it so that the user won't have to log in every single time. So now, if we take a look at our values controller, which is this one here, the values controller, you will see that it needs to be authorized. So if we want to use the values, we need to be authorized. So in Postman, if we send a request to the values controller with a get method and a one for the ID, so here, for example, API/values/1, and we want to get something, we send the request, and here we don't need to use any params. Let's go like this. Authorization has been denied for this request. So we get this 401 error, which means we are not authorized. So how can we use our token to prove that we indeed have authorization? So from the previous request, what we can do is we can copy the token string. So let me go back to the one where I logged in. So with the token, and let me send it again. Let's use this token that we have, the access token. Let's copy that. And well, let's create another request. I think it will be a little easier to jump between them. So this time, actually, let me copy this here as well. So here, let's use API/values and 1. Click on authorization and select the bearer token. Because if you look at it, it says the token type is bearer. So let me copy this once again because I copied something else. And let's paste the token in here. And then we can send the message once again. And this time we get the value. So you see the response is 200, which means okay, which means that it worked. So the HTTP request that we did worked out, even though like the only thing that it displays us as value. But this will be different once we have an actual application where there's something to show. So where does this value come from? Well, if you look at the get method here, so get API/values, for example, 5, it will give us value. So we get the ID, or we can pass an ID, and then we'll just get value. So let's say value by Dennis is what it should display. So let's rerun our application and let's run the Postman once again. And you see it gives us value by Dennis. So that pretty much is what it's going to return, even though obviously we want to change what it's going to return here if we want to run an actual application that is going to be useful. All right, so that's the part up to the Postman. All right, and now let's change our app so that we can also save a profile image. For that, we will add a different controller. We will call it user profile. So let's stop our application. Let's start debugging it and then go to our controllers folder. And here we need to add a new item. So, well, actually a new scaffolded item, this one here. And I'm going to select MVC controller with read-write actions. And here I'm going to go to controllers and use the MVC5 controller with read-write actions. So let's call this one user profile controller. So how I want to be able to access this user profile is, first of all, I need to make sure that we need to authorize. So we need to be authorized in order to do that. We need to have a token. And then I also need to define which route I want to use. So what is going to be the API location where this is going to be, or the URL. So this will be API user profile. Okay, so this is the route that I want to use for my controller. Also, this will not just be a controller, but it will be an API controller. Therefore, we need to add using system web HTTP, and then it should be fine. And once we do that and we import system web HTTP, now we have an ambiguous situation here, ambiguous references, because it still uses the system web MVC. And once we get rid of that, those errors disappear as well. But we still have a bunch of errors in there, but no worries, we're going to take care of that in a bit. We're going to get rid of those anyways. Actually, let's get rid of them directly. So let's get rid of all of it up to our user profile controller being empty. So now let's extend our database so that it contains a string called user profile or user image in the already existing database. So first, let's define our model under the models folder. And therefore, I'm going to create a new class in here, which I'm going to call user profile model. So this class is going to inherit from application user, and then I'm going to have a method here, public string profile image, which will just be a getter and setter. Now to configure our database, let's do the following. Under app start, here in this folder, add a new file called user profile config. So let's add a new item here, user profile config.cs. So this user profile config should inherit from entity type configuration of user profile model. So we are basically using the entity type configuration, and we need to import that. So let's add this. Okay, and then we need to also import our user profile model, which is using our own user profile model, this one here. So inside of our user profile config, what we're going to have to set up is our public user profile config, which will be a base, and it needs, or it requires, a key, which is going to be the username, because we need to know for whom we are uploading an image. So here has key, and we're going to use a lambda expression here where we're saying we get the username like this. So this takes care of the username, and then I'm going to add the table to user profile. So that's what we're going to do in the constructor here. We will let it know that it requires the key to be the username, and then we configure the table name that this entity is mapped to. So it should be mapped to the user profile entity. So now we need to migrate or enable migrations to update our database, because we're just changing our database. Therefore, let's go to tools and then to NuGet package manager here, and let's enable migrations like this and press enter. Okay, so that has been done for us. detect the database, initialize scaffold migration. All right, now we need to add migration user profile. So we're going to call this migration user profile because we added the user profile to our database. And finally, we need to apply this migration by updating our database. So update database. All right, so the migration has been taken care of. It was the user profile migration that we just created. Now, if we look at our Solution Explorer, we will see that a couple of classes were created. So here is a migration, initial create, and then the user profile. So if you look at this, that's where we added the profile image. And now let's finally define our database context, which also includes the profile image, so we can access it through the code. So now let's add a new class to our project on the top level. So let me add this class, and I'm going to call it user profile DB context. Okay, so this will be a DB context, which means that we now need to add identity DB context as the type here, a user profile model to it. Okay, so now we need to import user profile model for this to work, and it's under our models. And we will also need to add identity DB context here. So let me show potential fixes. The thing is, I wrote it with a capital B first, but it's under our entity framework class. So we will be using this class inside our controller in the next lecture to access and edit our data in the database. But before we do that, let's set up a constructor. So ctor, and then also an override method. So protected override void on model creating. All right, so this is an override method from the identity DB context that we can use. So one question that you might have then is our image just a string because we will store the path of the image? Well, no, the string is to store the image itself. How, you might be wondering? Well, let me show you this little tool here. So image to base 64. So you can convert an image to a base 64 online using this tool. So let's say I would want to convert this into a base 64. Now I can just select the file, drag it in here, then encode the image to base 64. So this is, for example, something that you can store in a string, and it is actually the image. This is called a base 64 string. Think of it as the image data encoded in a very long string. Of course, we can reverse this step by decoding it. So here, this was to encode an image, and now you can use the base 64, this code here, copy it, and decode it back to an image, and you will see that this is the image that we get. So now if I even change one letter here, you will see that suddenly it doesn't work anymore. So I get no image anymore. It's still, the file solution is still there and so forth, but it just doesn't know what to do with it. But that's basically what this base 64 can do for us. So you can actually store an image as a string. And of course, we will do the conversion part in Kotlin when building the front end. More on that later, however. Okay, so that's it for setting up our database. So now it will be ready to use our user profile, even though we need to program our controllers. So let's program our controller in the next part of. All right, now we are ready to program our controllers to return our profile image. So let's go back to our user profile and specifically the controller. So here what we need to do is we need to add the following methods to get and post the user profile, in case the username is also the user email. So a public string get method that will require the username, and let's use it like username like this. And then here I will use var context as the new profile or user profile db context, and actually with brackets like this. So what is it that we want to do? Well, we get the query, which will be context.users.first or defaults, and here we need to use the lambda expression, which is going to give us the username like this. So that's the query for it, and we need to return this query now. So this will be the query to get the username, and then this will be that we want to return the query if it's not null. So if it's null, return an empty string, otherwise return the query.profile image. And now we need a post request as well. So here, this will be the post for API/user profile. So let's quickly go again here. So this would be get API user profile username. Okay, and this one will be post API user profile. That's the next one that we're going to set up. So let's go ahead and create a public IHTTP action result. So that's what it's going to return, and I'm going to call it post. So here we use the from body keyword, which makes, or attribute, which makes it possible to parse models from the request body. And I'm going to pass a user profile, let me see, view model called user profile. And actually it's view, not view model, but model. So that's the model that we just created earlier. So this user profile model, which just has one property called profile image. Okay, so let me import that. So using Treblle model so that we can access it. All right, now let me get rid of this stuff here at the bottom. Now we can go ahead and again use our DB. So var DB. Oh, so it was context early. Now it's going to be the DB of the new user profile DB context. So now we can use this profile DB context again. And what I'm going to create here is going to be the result, which will be db.users.single or default. And here the lambda expression again, where we get the username. So b.username, where the user profile profile.username are the same. Okay, and as always a semicolon. So this will be the result, and then we check if result is not equal null. This should be a var, not a val. We're not in Kotlin yet. We're going to do that later. So if it's not null, not if it's null. So if it's not null, I want to set the result profile image to be user profile image. And then I'm going to save the changes. So save changes. Okay, so this is basically once we post a profile image, we want to pass the user profile, and then we want to store it in the database. So that's what we do here. We get the user profile context, then we get the result where we check for the username that we are currently at, and then we can set the user profile image to the result. And we need to return result OK here. So return OK. So this will return 200. So find the user's profile image, check if the result isn't null, and then save the image we got from the user. So let's try these methods in Postman. So let's run our application. This will save all of our files and run Postman as well. Once the application is running, okay, there we are. Our homepage works. Now let's go over to Postman. So here, go over to API, and this one will be user profile. User profile, like this. Here I'm going to need authorization with our token. All right, that's fine. Let's make sure the authorization still works. The request resource does not support HTTP method get. And that should have to do with me using get here. So let's use a post request instead. So let's send it. And there we have an error, as it seems. Exception non-static method requires a target. And if that happens, we are missing a body. So we need to pass something in the body as well. So let's cancel this request. And here in the body, we need to set a form. So here we need to enter the username, which will have the value of bb3@gmail.com. So that was the username, right? And the second one was the profile image. And here I'm just going to enter something like hello, for example. Okay, and now let's send it. And therefore we need to continue our application. So let's just keep on, let's rerun the application. Okay, let's run it again. And then go to over to our Postman and make sure we run the request again. And we see that we get a status of 200. Okay, so that means that posting the profile image or storing it as hello worked. All right, now let's fetch the user profile using a get method. So here we need to change the URL to be user profile, where we are also passing the username as a URL encoded variable. So we add the question mark with the username being bb3@gmail.com. Yeah, but we also need to make sure that we are passing the token, and this time it's going to be a get request. Okay, so now let's run it and see if we get hello. And there we are. So we get hello. So that means our data was actually stored, our image was stored, and it is available there. Even though in this case, the image is actually just a string that says hello. So there's no actual image there. But we're going to take care of that in a bit. Okay, so that's our controllers. And now let's get over to the Treblle integration part of this project. All right, now the next step will be to deploy our app along with the database to Azure. This way we will be able to use this API and consume it from our Android app, which we will start building in the second part. But how are we going to see if our users are experiencing bugs, or what if we want to monitor our API usage? Well, that's where Treblle comes into play. So let's go ahead and create an account and log in. So we're using the free plan here. Just go ahead and create an account if you want to follow along. So the cool thing is Treblle makes it super easy to understand what's going on with your APIs and the apps that use them. So imagine Treblle as a border controller officer that is always noting the input and output of your APIs. So let's create a new project in Treblle. I'm going to call it Treblle demo and add a project name here. We will leave the URL empty for now. We will have it once we deploy our app to Azure. Now let's finish and save the project. And there we are. So this will take us to the documentation. So here you can go over to .NET, which is what we are using. And you see there are other tabs as well. For example, PHP, Laravel, Node, and .NET Core, Ruby, and Go are in development, but will be available soon. So now let's go ahead and integrate Treblle to our project. So we need to install the Treblle package via NuGet. So let's go over to NuGet. So tools, NuGet, package, manager console, and you see there's a lot of stuff running from earlier, and here install package Treblle.net. And this then takes a little while, and once it's done, you will find this screen here. Okay, so it opens this Treblle API, and Treblle, well, in my case, it doesn't show properly, but one of them is the API key and the other one is the project ID. In order to get those, I go to Treblle again, to my settings, I get the project ID, which is the second window here. And the API key can be found under your settings, and there you will find your API key. So copy that and add that in there as well as the Treblle API key, and then click on the sub button. So what that will do is it will set up Treblle in our project. So let's go back to here and see whether it's added. So added package, configuration manager, and what we're interested in is this part here where it says successfully installed TrebbleNet 1.4 to Treblle demo. So now let's add the attribute to our account and user profile controllers. Adding them to individual controllers will apply the Treblle attribute to all the methods defined in them. So let's go over to the user profile controller. And here at the top, let me bring down the NuGet package. So here at the top, we have authorize, and on top of that, I'm going to add Treblle. And therefore I need to also add using Treblle.net. And now the same thing goes for, let me copy that, our other controller, which was the API controller called account controller. So here in the account controller at the very top, let's go ahead and add that in there as well. So let me add Treblle here as well. Let's make sure we import it. So show potential fixes and add using Treblle.net. So now we have integrated Treblle, and this is the easiest service to integrate ever. I mean, seriously, we just had to add a NuGet package, enter our account details, and that's it. Like add this Treblle keyword to our controllers where we need them. So that's that part. And in the next part, we are going to look at how to set up Azure. All right, and now comes the moment of truth, because we're going to deploy our project to Azure. So what we should do is, first of all, let's stop the application, then go to our application here, so the Treblle demo in our Solution Explorer, and then select Publish. So this will then open up this window, and you can see there are a bunch of targets that you can select, and I want to publish it to Azure. So here I'm going to use the Azure App Service Windows version, so click next here as well. Make sure you are logged in into an Azure registered account and have an active subscription. Okay, they give you a $200 credit for free, valid for a month once you start. So really make sure that that's the case. Once you are signed in and registered before that, you will find that you have a subscription name here. In my case, it's Azure Subscription 1. And here we need to add a new app service instance. So just press on plus, and here we create a new resource group. So what is a resource group? Well, a resource group is a container that holds related resources for an Azure solution. The resource group can include all the resources for the solution or only the resources that you want to manage as a group. In our case, it's going to contain our ASP app and the database. So here you can change the name if you want to. So for example, I'm going to call this one Treblle Demo. Okay, group name will be Treblle Demo. Then the hosting plan, we can change that as well. Select a plan, and in my case, And here something like Central US could work, or EU West or something like this. So West Europe, let's select that. That's where my project will be located because I'm in the west of Europe. And then click OK. And once that works, click on create. Let's see, creating app service with our Treblle demo and so forth. You could have also changed the name, obviously, but I'm fine with the name that I have there. And once that worked, you will find your app service instance here, Treblle demo in my case, with the deployment steps. So at this point, we can click on finish. Now you will find that you have this Treblle demo publish page. Let me close this here as well. You can then configure your SQL Server database here at the bottom. Okay, let's click on that. And I'm going to select here Azure SQL database. So it's not on-premise, but it's going to be in the cloud, which is what I want to do. So I want to store the database in the cloud so that I can consume it from front-end applications such as our Android app that we're going to build next. Okay, so here we need to select our SQL databases that we want to use. And I'm going to call it Treblle demo DB. And here we need to require a database server. So let's click on new, and we need to have an administrator username as well as administrator password and so forth. So I'm just going to say my username is going, or administrator username is going to be Dennis. Then I enter a password here and here as well, and then click on OK. And at this point, we have a database server, we have a database administrator, and we can click on create. So this will create a new database for us once the revalidating is done. And this then also takes a minute or two, or maybe 3. And then we have our SQL database. So let's select that and click next. And here we need to add a database connection username. So again, the ones that we had set up before, and I think it was Dennis in my case. And then we have the connection string value. So you can display it here by showing the secret. So displaying it will show you the connection string. You can also copy it, or I would recommend to copy it. And we can select the string to connect to it from anywhere. For example, from SQL Server Explorer in Visual Studio, if we want to. All right, and then click next. And at this point, click finish. So this will set everything up. And it's complete, so we can close it. At this point, we can click on publish here at the top right hand corner. And once it's published, here we go. We have our URL where we will find our application. So it takes a little while to load, as it seems, but once that is done, we can see our app. And it took a little while, but then it's available. Probably it needs to set up a little bit. So there we are. This is our application, and it doesn't look great because it's just the default, but it works. So we have our API, and you can even see the API that we had set up ourselves. So the profile image, for example, or user profile and stuff like that. So it's going to be a little slow, probably, I don't know why. But for now, let's just move on with our Treblle project. So here we'll go to view project, and we will find our API under settings. So here you can now add your API URL, which is going to be the URL of our project. So this one here, but with API at the end. So API /. So this is the link to my project. In your case, it will be depending on the name, what you have set up. In my case, it was Treblle Demo 2011 whatsoever, the time that we have now at AzureWebsites.net. And then we have API here that you need to add. And then you can update your project. So now to make sure our database is configured correctly, let's run a full test in Postman. This time, there's no need to run our app as a local host, as we will be using our site URL. So this one here. So let's go over to Postman and not use the local host as we have done before, but let's register with an account here. So account/register, and this time let's go over to the body. Well, we don't need this token. Let me get rid of this token. And no auth. Let's go over to body, and the body will be just a raw body here. And let me register once again, as we have done before. So here, Treblle, and now let me register with the bb5@gmail.com. And let's see if this is gonna work. Let's run it. And this has to be a post, obviously, not a get. So let's run it again. Plain text is not okay. Again, we need to run it as JSON, but that should work now this time. So sending the request, this time it actually sends the request. And let's see how quickly this is going to be. It seems like our website is pretty slow that we have there, but yeah, we get an okay status. So it worked. So now we have registered this user. If we run it again, it will not work because the user already exists, right? So now let's get a token. Therefore, let's run a get request. This time we want to get the token. So here we directly enter token after the URL of our project. Then we need to make sure that the body is of type XWW form URL encoded. So let me copy the password from here. So actually yes, we need the password. So here, let me add the key password. And this will be the email will be 5 username. And we need to add the grant type as well. And the grant type will be password. Let me check if the order doesn't matter. So the password itself will be this here. So this will be the username, grant type will be password. This is the XWW form URL encoded. Let's run this. And there we have our token. So let's copy the token all the way down here. Let's make sure that we have this token because we're going to test it with another post request. So let me actually open up in the new post request. Here I'm going to add authorization using the Bearer token, adding the token, and making sure that I have the right URL and body. So let me copy this here. Let's add it here. This will be not the token, but API/user profile, like this. And now the body itself should be again of a form type. And let's use the username, which will be our bb5@gmail.com. And then another key will be profile image. And let's call this one test1. And then let's run it. Let's see if this request is going to work out. We get the status okay. That's good. And now let's get the profile image. So therefore, let's set that to get. And user profile, question mark, user name will be this one here. So bb5 and so forth. The authorization is still the same token. And let's run it. We don't need the body here. So let's go to none. Let's send it. And we see we get test1. So we see that storing the image did work out and getting the image also worked out. So we did a lot of API work. Okay, so now let's look at the Treblle dashboard. Because if we look at our project, and let me see, did I update the project? I think I did. Let me go over to the dashboard. Yeah, we are. There we are. So we see we have our user profile get, where we had a load time of 500 milliseconds. with a status code of 200. Then we had the post request where we posted the username and the profile image. We had the account register request where we had the email and password as well as confirm password. So you see here the password itself is hidden, but the confirm password isn't hidden. And that has to do with us not using the right, let's say, keyword here. So in Treblle, there are certain keywords assigned specifically, which will be hidden, okay? And we are using one that is not hidden. So let's make a quick change to hide this data. Because if we look at this specific request here, we can see we have an email, a password, confirm password, and the confirm password is actually readable. And that's something that you don't want to have, right? You want to really avoid that. So now, in order to change it or to hide it, let's go back to our project. Let's go over to our Solution Explorer and here specifically to the web config. Here we need to add a line under app settings. So we have this Treblle app settings here. Let's add another one, add key called confirm password. And let's set the value to be secret field, highly sensitive field. Okay, so this comes from Treblle itself. That's how they say you need to set up a key in order to hide it. So secret field and highly sensitive field. And this is useful for censoring all kinds of data. So whatever we want to hide, even if they are fields that we introduced ourselves. Because this confirm password field is a field that we didn't introduce ourselves. It was there by default, right? It's just how the predefined code that we had in our account controller, I think it just set it up this way. And yeah, here we have the email and login provider has registered. Either way, so we have those. And yeah, this is one way of doing it. I'm going to, however, use a different approach. So let me comment this line out here. We're going to do it using a different approach. We're going to use data binding. So we're going to change the confirm password field in the data binding model to confirm underscore password, because this is censored by Treblle by default. All right. So we will change the field name and leave solution 1 to any other data that we want to censor in the future. So in case you want to ever censor something, that's the way to do it. So inside of models, you will find account binding models. And here, find the registered binding model. So let me search for registered binding model. There we are. So here we see we have the name, which is required. And then further down, we have confirm password. So this is the string that we want to change. So right click on the confirm password. And here I just need to change the name from confirm password to password underscore confirmation. And I'm going to change the display name to it as well. So it should be password confirmation. Okay, now that we have that, let's save it. Let's build our application once again. So here, go all the way to the top, build the app. You see the build was successful. Now publish the app and click on publish again. And then once it's published, our application should be ready to go and we can run Postman again. So here I'm creating a new post, which will be with API account register using the body raw, where I'm registering user, let's say 8, for example, just to be sure. And this should be password confirmation. Let me see, did I write it with M or with a N? Account binding confirmation with N. Okay, I typed it correctly, confirmation. So let's send this. Let's send the request. And let's see if we can register our user this way. The status was okay. So let's go over to Treblle. And we can see that the account was registered. So our email was bb8@gmail.com. The password was hidden and the password confirmation was hidden as well. All right. So that's pretty much it for our API. So we have built the back end now, and now it's time to actually use the front end in order to consume our API. So see you in the next part. All right, so you managed the first part of this course. You have taken care of the API of the backend, so to speak, and now it's time to consume it. And in order to consume it, we are going to build a register screen, and then we're going to allow the user to register as well as change his profile image or her profile image. And this is something that you will need in almost any application where you have user management. So this is going to be very useful for basically all of your future career as a developer. And we're going to use Kotlin as well as Android Studio and Jetpack Compose, which is the latest technology when it comes to building user interfaces in Kotlin. So if you don't know much about it yet, this will definitely help you. And if you feel like this is too fast, then check out my Kotlin masterclass YouTube video that we have available. We also have a full course available. You can check that one out if you want to, where you also have quizzes, exercises, Q&A support, as well as a bunch more additional examples where you're going to learn a lot more about app development in general. But also there is a Jetpack Compose video that we uploaded. It's another 3.5 hour course or so where you learn Jetpack Compose from scratch. So definitely check that out as well. Okay, so at this point, let's get started building our application that is going to consume the API, which means it's going to load the data from our own website that we've just set up on Azure, which is basically a website, right? And it loads the data from there and allows us to communicate with that. So let's get started. All right, so let's get started building our Android application that is going to consume our API. Therefore, I'm going to use Jetpack Compose, which is the latest approach in terms of how to build an Android application. Specifically, the UI is done using Jetpack Compose. So let's call this one Treblle demo, and everything else can stay the same by default. All right, so once our project is loaded, we can get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my main activity and set up the UI properly here. So in the main activity, we have this greeting method. We won't need it, so let's get rid of it. It's just a predefined method. And then we can replace it with a new composable that we're going to create. So let's create a composable. And by the way, if you don't know what composables are, you should check out my video on Jetpack Compose. So I have an entire course on that on YouTube here, authentication. So I'm going to call this composable, which is basically just a UI item or element in our screen. So this authentication for now will be an empty composable, so there's no content in it, but we can instead display it in our surface as well as in our preview here as well. So let's just set it up this way. So now obviously we want to set up our authentication step by step. And therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new UI element. So a new screen, so to speak, but the main activity is going to contain the screen. So let's go ahead and create a new folder here inside of UI. So a new package, and it's not going to be in theme, but UI.screens. And inside of screens, that's where I want to create a new Kotlin class composable. So here a file, which I'm going to call sign up. So this will be the sign up screen. And in the sign up screen, that's where we now can take care of all of the composables that are then in the end going to build our UI that we want to have. So let's go ahead and make this a composable and call it sign up. Our sign up screen is going to be inside of a column. Okay, so this column will have a bunch of content. So let me import column here. And inside of this column, that's where, well, first of all, I want to design it. So let's make sure that it's going to take the entire screen that it has available. So modifier.fill max size, which will take care of it taking the entire width and height. And at the same time, I'm going to add a horizontal padding, and let me import padding for this to work. And this will be horizontal padding of 16 density pixels, and here we need to import DP as well. And then I'm going to also set up the arrangement, so the vertical arrangement, so that everything inside of it is going to be arranging towards the center. So what's going to be inside of this column? Well, in the column we add our outline text field, composable, which is an input field for the email address. This email must have a value and on value change property for keeping track of the entered characters. We will leave them empty for now. We also add a modifier and set it to fill max width so that it takes the entire width, and a label set to show the text with email address. So let's get started by using this composable called outlined text field, this one here. So you see it's an add composable, which has a bunch of properties. Okay, so let's set this up. You see value and on value change need to be set. So for this to be working, we need to set up a email state. Okay, we need to work with states. And while we're creating states, let's set up a couple of states directly, because we will need on a sign up screen, need to know the toggle state of whether the password is being displayed or not. Then we need the password state, which is going to store the password value. Then the email state, which is going to store the email value. So whatever the user entered in the text fields. So let's set those up. Val toggle state, which is just going to be a remember. So this is a state keyword that we're using, remember, which is basically going to be an interactive variable that contains the value and is, well, just allows us to then use it and override it. Okay, so here this will be a mutable state because we want to be able to override it, and by default it's going to be set to false. So mutable state off. Let me see what's up here. We need to import mutable state off. All right, now the same thing will be for our password state. So val password state, which will also be a remember. Actually, let me copy this part here. And the password state will be a string. So I'm going to set the default to empty. And finally, we will need the email state. So val email state, which will also be remember of an empty string by default. So we're going to override it obviously over time. So the first field is going to be, so this one here, outlined text field, will be our email. Okay, so this one will contain the email state value. And once we change the value, so on value change, what we want to do is we get a string that is going to be the current changed value, and we assign that to the email state. So email state value is going to be it. Okay, so this it string that we're getting each time that value of our text field, outline text field, is changing. So now I'm going to also set up some modifiers here, or some more properties for our outline text. So the modifier, for example, will be modifier.fillMaxWidth. So I want it to take the entire width. And then we can set a label to it. So a label will display a beautiful little text. We need to import text for this to work. And it's not text field, but text. So let's import text compose UI. And this will just say email address. All right. So that's the label. And then because this is an email entry field, we want to also assign a keyboard. Let me actually put it not here, but here, the comma. So we want the keyboard options to be set as well. So we are not going to use the default ones, but we're going to use the ones for emails. So the keyboard options, and here we can pass a value like this. We need to import keyboard options with the Alt Enter, by the way, if you're wondering how I do it. And here keyboard type will be keyboard type dot, and you see email. So that's how you can assign different types of keyboard types on your emulator. So ASCII, number, password, and so forth. So in this case, this outline text will be our email text field. Okay, now we can do the same thing for our password text field. So let me just copy this and put this one to be the password state value, and we are going to override the value of the password state. It's going to still have a fill max. Actually, let me add a little bit of padding here as well. So padding of vertical padding of 16 dp, so that we have a little bit of distance there. The label should be email password. Keyboard options will obviously not be the email ones, but the password ones. But the thing is, what we can do is we can actually override this directly with something else. So let me show you a little trick here. So what I want to have is, and let me actually show it to you. I want to have this screen here where we have the email address. So this is the label, by the way. Then we have the password. This is again the label. And then here, this is the toggle button that I want to use. And that's where we need the toggle state. So if I enter something, you see we don't see the password. If I toggle the button, then you see we see the password. So that's what we want to achieve. In order to achieve that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use first of all our toggle state that we have set up at the beginning. And second of all, I will need the trailing icon property. So this is an icon that is trailing, which means it's at the end of the text field. So here, let me just set up the trailing icon property. I can add that by going ahead like this, trailing icon, and then this has to be a lambda expression. So here I'm going to add an icon button, which is going to, well, we need to import icon button for this to do anything, import. And then once we click on it, so on click, there's this other property that we can now run, and the icon button needs an icon entry. So this is the content of the icon button, which is just going to be an icon. And this will be what should happen once we click on the icon button. And the only thing that we are going to do is we're going to override the value of the toggle state. So we're going to say it's going to be toggle state value, but this time negated with this exclamation mark here. So what will be the content of our icon button? The thing is, we will need to add something to our build.gradle here to the app one. We need to add a dependency here, which will allow me to use certain types of icons. So here, please use this dependency if you want to do the same thing. So Android X compose material icons extended with the compose version. Okay, so once you added this line, sync this file, this build Gradle, and then you can go ahead to your sign up and, well, to any of your Kotlin files in the project, and you can now use the icons that are inside of this package. So here I want to use the icon, and we need to import icon, the Android Compose one. By the way, Alt Enter once again in order to get the shortcut here. And this will be the image vector that we need to set. So the thing is, I'm going to use a super quick if statement here. I'm going to say toggle state.value. So if it's true, then use icons.default.visibility, and else use icons.default.visibility off. So what this does is basically this thing here. And that's a cool thing. We're saying once we click on the button, change the state of toggle state value, and it automatically changes the image vector, which means it changes the icon that we see here. So either it is this eye or it's this eye crossed through. Okay, so that's how we can take care of that. And the thing is, the icon is not happy yet. So let's take care of that by actually adding the content description, because it just always needs this content description. I don't know why. They could have made this an optional field in my opinion, but they decided not to. Okay, so this is going to be our second entry, which is this email password. And now the thing is that you see that this is hidden and we can unhide it. But in order to unhide it, we need to use something called a transformation. Let me see. So it's inside of our outlined text field, which goes all the way up to here. So you can see that's where the bracket starts and that's where it ends. So here I'm just going to set up something called a visual transformation. So there's this visual transformation property that I'm going to now override. So I'm going to say if the toggle state value is true, but we can just check the value itself because it's a Boolean, right? Then set the visual transformation to be none. And otherwise, so else, set the visual transformation to be password visual transformation. So this password visual transformation is a method. And what it does is it uses this character here to mask something. So they call it mask because that's what it does. It masks the character with this. So if I were to replace this, let's say I replace this with an X here, it's read only, but we can override it. So if I replace this with an X, for example, and this is a char, so we need to use exclamation marks, and let me actually sign up in here, sign up like this, and import sign up. What this will do, and let me see, come on, let me import it. Now in this case, the autocomplete didn't work. So let me show you real quick. Then it will replace these dots with X's. Okay, that's what I just overrode it with. So this is our solution, and whatever I enter, you see the first ones were in fact X's, but lower caps, it's going to override everything with X's. So that's what our visual transformation does for us. And by default, it's using this little dot icon, which is just this little dot here. Okay. All right, so that's our password visual transformation. I'm going to leave it as a default value there because I'm happy with it. And now let's take care of a button where I'm going to have an on click. Well, let me actually import button first and the compose button. And then in the on click event, for now, I'm just going to say do nothing. And the modifier will be modifier.fill max width, because you see that this button takes the entire width. Obviously it doesn't take the entire width because the column has a little bit of padding. So if you recall, the column where it is inside of, it has a padding of 16 dp horizontally, so towards the left and right. Okay, so that's our button, which fills the max width right now. And the button itself needs a content. So it needs to have, for example, a text content, which I'm going to set to sign up. And I'm going to add a modifier here being modifier.padding with a vertical padding of 8 density pixels. Okay, I don't want the text to be too close to anything else. So that's why I'm setting up the padding here. And then if we look at it, we have this divider. So let me get rid of this. And then we have a divider with a text and another text. So let's just add those two. This will be a divider composable, which is just this line. Okay, and you can modify it by using the modifier.padding, which will be 16 towards the top. So 16 density pixels. And then underneath I have a row with two texts in it. So I'm going to set the modifier to be fill max width. So this should take the entire width available, except for a little bit of padding, of top padding to being 16 dp. And then I'm going to add horizontal arrangement as well, which will be that it should be arranged towards the center. So here, arrangement center. All right, so this is the row and it needs a content. So we need to add those closing and opening brackets here. And as you see, the row just has two items. It has a text and the bold text. So I'm going to create this text here saying the text should be already have an account, question mark. And then the other text should say login. So text should be login. And the font weight should be bold. So font weight bold, there is this value that we can directly assign. So now if we run this, we should get our user interface. Let me see. Yeah, there we are. It's actually our solution. So let's test this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and hide the password. And signing up will obviously not do anything because our onClick is not implemented yet. Okay, so that is our sign up user interface, which is the first part of our application. And the next part will be to set up the network libraries with the service class. So let's have a quick pause now, because this was quite a lot of code that we wrote, and I went through it super quickly because I'm assuming that you already have an idea of what's up with Jetpack Compose. If you had no idea, but you know Kotlin, I think it might have been fine what I did there with the speed that I did it. I tried to still explain stuff, but yeah, let's just keep on going in the next part of the video. All right, so now let's set everything up so that we can actually communicate with such a service like Treblle or like our API in general. Therefore, we will need to go back to our build.gradle file, and we need to add a couple of dependencies here. So I'm going to use retrofit, Moshi, and the HTTP3 logging interceptor. Okay, so let's implement those here. You can see it's these ones. You can pause the video now and add them. So it's come square up retrofit 2, then retrofit 290, then come square up Moshi Kotlin 193, which is just a converter to return to turn JSON response from the API to Kotlin objects and vice versa. So this will make it a lot easier to work with JSON objects. The cool thing is a JSON object is actually just, if you look at it, really just a little bit of text, right? But if you can use it like a Kotlin object where you have the properties and subclasses inside of it with properties and stuff like that, it's a lot easier, and that's what Moshi helps us to do. So retrofit helps to communicate with the API, and then we are using the converter, which helps us to work with Moshi via retrofit, and then we have HTTP3, which logs the network status when communicating with the API. So here I'm using the logging interceptor 472. Okay, now that that is out of the way, we will need an interface, which is going to be the service that allows us to authenticate. So let's go ahead and set up an extra folder for that, which I'm going to just put into our project, and I'm going to call this one data. Okay, so this one is going to take care of all of the data stuff. Now let's create a Kotlin file class, which will be an interface, and I'm going to call this one authentication service. And authentication without the E, like this, should be fine. And by the way, after we have created that, let's make sure we sync our build.gradle once we have added those dependencies. Otherwise, it's not going to do anything for us. So here, our authentication service. So this will be this is a data package which will allow us to do authentication. We're going to get back to it in a bit. Let's first create our model. You could, of course, also create an extra model folder for it and so forth, but I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to make this a data class. So here, Kotlin file class, data class, user. So we want to know how a particular user is going to look like. So you could call it user or register user. I'm going to call this one register user, and this one is going to have an email, which will be of type string, then the password, which is going to be of type string, and then we had the password underscore confirmation. You might recall from our API setup. So that's exactly how the objects were called in our Postman and in our API. And this was under account register. So if we want to register a user, we need an email, a password, and password confirmation. So you see it's register, and we're going to call this one register user so we can register our user very easily. So that's here, register user, and exactly the same names. Really important. This is going to save us a lot of headaches later on. All right, so now that that is out of the way, let's go over and go back to our authentication service. So in our authentication service, we can now go ahead and create our post. And this is at post, so I'm using the post annotation where I need to tell where I want to go. So the URL I want to use, the endpoint, and this one will be account register. So if you look at it, this is account register. So API account register. So this is exactly where we want to go. That's why I'm using that exact letters or those exact letters here as well. So now we are going to use a suspend function, which is a coroutine function, which allows us to do something in the background. And registering a user is always something that could take some time, and it's really important that we do it in the background. So here I'm using the body annotation from retrofit, and the content will be the register user object. So here, register user. So we are passing the register user as the body to our account register endpoint. All right, so now that is out of the way, now let's go ahead and create a singleton class for building a retrofit Moshi and logging interceptor. So I'm just going to create a new object here, and this is just common practice to do it this way. So here I'm going to call this one API, like that. And now the content of it will be, first of all, our URL. So private val base URL. This will be our constant. And here we need to pass the base URL of our project. So here it's this part here. So that's what I need to pass in here, like that. And we also need to make sure that we have the slash at the end. So this will be our base URL. And then we need to also have the API path. So const val API path, which will just be API slash. So once again, if we want to use our API, well, we here we're at the help side of things, but here you see API account register. So the whole URL would be this here. So whatever our name of the website is, then API account register. And there we can now send the body with the register information, as we have seen in Postman earlier. So now instead of doing it in Postman, we're going to do it with our application, right? So that's really the whole idea of setting all of this stuff up. All right, now let's set up Moshi. So Moshi by using the moshi.builder. And here we need to import Moshi. So let's make sure we have that. Import Moshi. And here we are adding our Kotlin JSON adapter factory, this one here. And we need to brackets like this, and then we can build it. So that's how you set up a Moshi object. All right, so we have this Moshi object now. Now I'm going to use our HTTP logging interceptor, which just helps us to log the status when we are making requests. So let's create a private val logging, which will be an HTTP logging interceptor, double G, logging interceptor, like this. So it will just be a logging object. And then we need to set up the HTTP client. So private val HTTP client, which will be an OK HTTP client dot builder dot apply. And this builder needs to have brackets, and now we can apply our changes. So I'm going to use the logging that we set up earlier and set the level of it to be HTTP logging interceptor.level body. So it should log the body, and we want to add a network interceptor to it, which is going to be our logging object. So here we set the level, and now we are adding it. And at this point we can build it. So let's build the HTTP client. Now we need to set up our retrofit builder or retrofit object. So private val retrofit, and this will be not retention, but retrofit.builder, like this. And here we are adding the converter factory, and here we need to pass the converter factory that we want to use. And I want to use the Moshi converter factory, creating it with our Moshi object that we created earlier. So let me put that into a separate line so it's a little more readable. So that's always how you set up retrofit. It's just this whole stuff is just something that is always the same. The only thing that changes is this part here where you set up your base URL and your API path. The rest is always the same. So we are adding the converter factory. We are setting the base URL to be our base URL. We are setting the client to be our HTTP client that we have set up. And then we are building this thing. So here, build our retrofit object. And now finally, we are going to set up an auth service object, which will be our authentication service. But we're going to only load it once we require it by lazy. So using the lazy keyword and the by keyword. And then we use our retrofit object to actually create something with our authentication service. So to create the authentication service, so to speak. So class.java, because this is basically how it still works. So auth service. So now we have our auth service and we will be able to use it later on. Okay, so that's basically the setup here. Our authentication service, this is the service that we have used. So now we can go ahead and use this register user function in order to pass the register user object, which is this user here, this one, and register a user. So next, let's look at how we can actually register a user. All right, so this part is going to be a little longer, where we're going to actually register a user. So far we only have taken care of the UI and setting up retrofit, but now let's actually combine it and use it. So therefore, I will need to add another dependency. So here, let me add the navigation dependency because I want to be able to move between screens, and therefore we need to use the Android navigation compose 2.4.0, and in this case I'm using the beta 2, which is still the best stable version. Well, it's a beta, but still stable. So there we are. Now let's go ahead and actually create a main screen nav host controller. So let's create a new screen, and this one will be the Kotlin file class, which I'm going to call main screen. So this main screen is where we want to go, and this will have a nav host controller as a parameter. It's in its block, we will call the nav host and pass the variable we created as an argument with its start destination set as sign up. So basically we want to handle our different screens, elements, or sign up, for example, we're going to display it on a main screen and so forth. So let's just get started and see how this is going to pan out. So first of all, this will be a composable as well, so that we can display composables inside of it. So we're going to call this one main screen, and I'm going to pass the nav host controller here as a parameter, and then we can go ahead and set up the nav host here. So nav host, which needs a nav controller, and I'm going to pass the nav host controller to it, and it needs a, well, the thing is it says graph, but actually we can just set up the start destination to be sign up, and yeah, sign up like this. And let's set up the actual composable in there. So the composable, so the thing is, like, here you add all of your different screens that you want to have, or the different routes that you want to have. So this route will be sign up, and I need to set it up, and I'm going to say that this composable sign up will actually be the start destination. So here I can use my sign up variable, or this one here, my sign up, not variable, but actually the composable. So instead of, now in our main activity, instead of going to sign up, so now inside of the main activity, we can instead use our main screen. But the main screen is going to need a nav controller or nav host controller. So let's create one, nav controller, which will be a remember nav controller. And here I'm just going to use the default and not override it, and pass that to our main screen. So now I'm going to need a repository And now I'm going to need a repository class with an authentication service as its parameter. So let's set that up in our data here, and this will be a Kotlin file class. This time it's actually a class repository like this. So here I'm going to pass a private val auth service, which will be our authentication service. So authentication service like this. So inside of it, what I'm going to need is another suspend function, which is going to run in the background, and it's going to take care of registering the user. So here we need to pass in the user object and then say what we want to do with it. So what we want to do with it is we just want to call the auth service and register the user, with register user being the register user that we are passing to this suspend function. Okay, so we're going a little way around using our authentication service, which contains, if we look at it, the suspend function called register user. So that's what the repository is going to take care of. Now, next, what I'm going to set up is going to be a resource class to manage requests or response processes. So if we are loading, or if there is an error, or when there is a success answer, I want to take care of that as well. So let's create another class in here inside of data, which I'm going to call resource. And this one will be a sealed, not interface, but a sealed class. And it could be of many different types. So I'm going to pass the data, which will be a t nullable. And by default, I'm going to set that to null. And then the message, which will be of type string nullable, which is going to be null by default as well. So inside of it, inside the sealed class, that's where I'm going to set up the loading class, passing t nullable by default being null, and it's going to return a resource t with data. So this will basically just be displaying or letting us know whether the register process is loading or whether there's a success. So let's set up another class called success, which is going to also require data of type t, which I'm gonna not set to null this time, and this will resource t data. All right, and here class error t, and this one will not have data but an actual message. Well, it will also have data, but it will also have a message. All right, and then let's use our resource once again, and it will not return. Well, I said it would return, but it's actually going to inherit from resource. Okay, so here data and message. So basically we're using this resource to say, okay, do we get a message? Do we get data? And then if we get a message, that will usually be with the error. So we get data and the message. We can get data, but it can be null. So basically it's going to return a resource letting us know whether whether the process was a success, an error, or whether it's loading. All right, now let's go ahead and set up view models, because we are going to use the MVVM architecture here. So this one will be view model. Actually, it's under UI.view model. Okay, so inside of our view models, that's where we want to create our main view model. So this will be a Kotlin file class main view model. So this will be a class where we pass our repository as its parameter, which its data depends on. And then we extend it to be of type view model. So here private val repository is going to be needed to be passed, and this will be of type view model. So and then we're importing the life cycle here like this. Okay, so what should happen in here? Well, we are going to create a setter variable called register request state for tracking the register user request, which will return a mutable state flow with the resource type of nothing. So we use nothing when we are not expecting any data. This will only be mutable in the main view model class. So we're going to make it private. So let's go ahead and set that up. Private vol register request state, which will be a mutable state flow of type resource nothing, and this will be a nullable, and we pass null to it as the value. So let's import resource as well as mutable state flow to our project. So we have made it private, and then we create a register state as the getter, which can be accessible outside of this class. So this is a private, right? And now we need to get a getter. So I'm going to call this one register. Well, actually just the same thing here, but without the underscore here, because this is not going to be a private one. And this is going to return a state flow of type resource nothing. So resource nothing. And let's import state flow for this to work as well. All right, and nothing, well, we need to make sure that this is going to be passing as a nullable. And then we have the getter here, which is just going to return our register request state. So now let's take care of an error handler. So vol error handler, which will be an coroutine exception handler. So coroutine exception handler. And I'm just going to use the lambda expression here. So I get a variable that I'm not going to use, and I get the error. So what should I do with it? Well, I'm going to check if the error is an exception. And if that's the case, then set the registered request state value to be resource dot error with the error message. So here error dot message. So now you see how everything comes together, because the register request state, if you look at it, is of type resource nothing. So here we can now use resource error, or we can use resource success or loading. Okay, so that's what we're setting up here. And that's if the, well, if it is an error. So it will help us track errors that might occur during the request process. And the error handler returns an exception. So using the register request variable, which is a type of the resource class we created, will retrieve an, well, any error as a message from that exception. So now we need to set up a function that will register the user. So register user, where we pass the register user object. And here I'm going to set the register request state value to be resource dot loading, because if we are registering a user, we need to make sure that we are actually loading. And then we can start our coroutine. So view model scope dot launch, and here we can launch with our dispatcher. Wait a second, view model scope. Let's make sure we imported it. Okay, and let's import the launch method as well. And now we need to say on which thread, so to speak, we want to run it. So on which dispatcher. And I'm going to use the IO plus an error handler here. So this will be the context in which we run this coroutine. And now we can use our repository dot register user, where we pass the register user to be the register user that we pass to our register user main view model. So this is quite a workaround, you could say. It's not really a workaround in terms of we're fixing a bug, but you see, like, this is an entire flow where the data goes through, because we use this repository method to use the auth service to call the register user. So the repository method will use the auth service. Our main view model, however, will use the repository in order to allow us to also check the state to know whether we are loading, whether we get an error, and so forth. So we're not just building an application like, let's say, like a beginner's application, but this is really an advanced app where you can be very confident using this approach in your production application as well. So here this will be resource.success, where I'm setting the data to null. So this register request state is a mutable state flow of type resource, nothing, and resource can be any of those, right? It can be loading, success, or error. So what we're saying is, while we are registering the user, we are loading. And once we are done, we are success. So once we have registered the user, and that will be at this point. All right, so now we're going to use our main view model to set up a main view model factory. So inside of here, I'm going to create another class, which I'm going to call main view model factory, like this. And this main view model factory is going to require private val repository, which will be of type repository, and this will inherit from view model provider dot factory. So this will be a view model provider factory, so to speak. So whenever you do that, you need to run an override function in here. So let's implement the members. Let's override this create function, which will take a view model and create. So this is the create method, which will return a view model, and it's going to need a model class. So here we need to implement it. So when a subclass of view model, so the class that we created earlier, our main view model, for example, has a parameter, which in our case is the repository, then we need to create this factory class for it before it can be successfully initialized. So we create and extend the view model provider factory, and then we override the create method and specify the main view model as the class we need to initialize and return it with the repository. So let me show you how that works. So we're going to check if the model class is assignable from our main view model, and this should be main view model, this one, the one that we created, class.java. So if that works, and not Java, but Java, if that works, then return our view model. So return our main view model with the repository as, well, repository as T. And otherwise, so in the else block, just throw an error, an exception, better said, class not found exception. Okay, so this was a lot of setup that we needed to do. But the thing is, now we can use our view model in our signup function, because our signup function, as you might see, is for now just UI. So now we need to make sure that it also does all of the technical side of things, where it just loads data and sends data and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it via using a view model. So we're going to pass a view model to our signup method. And then what we can do is we can set up a preview here, add preview, if you want to be able to see it in our designer. So show background, well, actually, let me import preview first. And now we can show the background to be true. And this will be a composable here. So add composable, which will be a function called sign up preview. Okay, it has to be called exactly like the composable here, sign up, with the keyword preview assigned to it. And I'm just going to display the sign up with the view model that we're going to pass here. So with a view model. Okay, and well, we won't see it now. We have to run the application before we can see it. But now that we have set up that, let's go back to our sign up here at the very top and take care of tracking the request progress as we create a variable and collect the state set to register user. So let's go ahead and have a register state here, which will be using our view model, registers request state, collect as state dot value. So this will give us this register request state, which will let us know whether it is an error, whether it was successful, or whether it is loading. All right, and Now in our main, well, this is what this register state will take care of. So this is a state. We need to collect it as a state, and then we can get the value. And we're assigning that to the register state variable here. And then I need a context, which will be the local context current. So let's import local context here, because I'm going to require it in one of my next steps. So the thing is, once we click on the button here, this one, the sign up button, this button that says sign up in the text, we want to do something. We want to actually register the user. So register user, we need to create an object of it where we pass the email and the password as well as password confirm. So where do we get all of those from? Well, we get those from our outlined text fields. Okay, so here, register user email, which will be the email state value. Then we need to pass the password, which will be our password state value. And then we need to pass the password confirmation. And now we could also create another UI element for that, but I'm going to be lazy and I'm going to just say password state value should be passed. And then we can use our view model, and not this one, but the view model to register the user, with the register user object being our register user object. So we're assigning the register user here and doing the actual registering. So we have basically put everything outside. So all of the magic that is going to happen outside, setting it up in a repository, our factory, view model, authentication, so that we have a very easy way to register a user inside of our user interface. So we really separated everything here. So now what we should do is we should display something to the user depending on whether this was successful or not. So underneath this row text here, I'm going to set up a when clause here where I'm going to check the register state. I'm going to check, is it resource dot loading? If that's the case, then display something to the user. And let me import resource here so that we can use it. And I'm just going to display this little toast here. So registration in progress, toast length dot show. So that's what I want to display to the user. Okay, and then if it was successful, so if the registration process worked, so if resource success, I want to display another toast that is going to say user successfully registered. And then in case that we get an error, so is resource dot error, then I want to display that an error has occurred. Now you could go ahead and read the error and display the error and so forth, but I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm just going to say an error has occurred in that case. Now, if we look at it, our view model here, our main view, well, our sign up, better said, needs a view model now. Okay, so if we look at our main screen, we see that our sign up doesn't get a view model yet. So let's create a view model that we can pass here. But we need to get the view model to our main screen first. So here, let's create a view model, main view model entry for the parameters. And then we can use that view model that we get to pass it here to our sign up method. Okay, but then when we do that, we also need to make sure that we create a view model parameter in our authentication composable, which is inside, I think, our main activity. So let me jump over to the main activity. So inside of authentication, we need to pass a view model here as well. And then we can pass the view model to our main screen here. So view model is going to be our view model. Okay. And now we need to make sure that we also create a repository inside of our main activity. So private val repository, which we can do lazily. So only once we need it, we want to create it. We don't need to create it otherwise. And this will just be a repository object, which will be an auth service here. So API auth service, which is this auth service, which then creates the retrofit authentication service for us, which then actually allows us to do anything with the repository. Well, actually the registration with the repository. And then we need to create a view model inside of here as well. So private val view model, which will be of type main view model by view models. So here, this one. And what this does is it returns a lazy delegate to access the component's activity view model. If the factory producer is specified, then the view model provider factory returned byte will be used to create the view model for the first time. So I'm going to use my main view model factory here and pass the repository. This one that we just created. And now that we do that, you see that our authentication, if you look at it, needs a view model, right? So let's pass the view model to it, which we just created, this one up here. So view model, which will be our view model. And then I think that should be almost it. Okay, now there are, let me see here. Oh yeah, our authentication here at the bottom inside of our main activity also needs to have a view model here. So here I'm just going to create a arbitrary view model, like just a random view model, not our own that we're passing, but just anyone for the designer, so to speak. So now the thing is, when we're doing all of that stuff, one thing that is very quickly forgotten and then it just doesn't work and we get errors and stuff like that is that we don't have the internet permission, because at this point we need to have the internet permission, otherwise none of this will work. So here, users permission, Android name, Android permission, internet. And then the last thing that we need to make sure is that we look at our authentication service. Okay, so here, authentication service. So you see, when we are running a post request, we are setting or sending it to account register. But then if you look at our API, you see that it's API/account register. So now we could, of course, just say API/account register. But what if this API changes? Well, then we would have to go here and change it. But the thing is, we actually created an extra property for it, which is inside of our API, or an extra variable. We called it API path. So we don't want to have to manage it on or at multiple different spots. That's why we created this API class, or object better said, to take care of that. So let's instead just say here, use API.API path and register the user. And now, before we test it, I found a little bug that I had, and that is inside of my composable, I accidentally added a closing bracket inside of the string, which shouldn't happen. So this root should just be sign up. And well, I just had this little bug. So if you followed along exactly as I did, then you will have the same problem. And now at this point, we should be able to run the application. And I actually had another problem, and that is a problem with my emulator, and I can't fix it. It just happens every single time. I have to set the time manually because automatically it just doesn't set the time correctly. So it's December 15th now, and I had to set it back to work properly. So let me create an account here. I'm going to call this one Dennis1 at tutorials. Once again here at tutorials.eu, and then the password will be 123, and then a special character at, then AA, like this. Okay, so this will be a password that is the minimum length. It has to be 6 in length, or 6 characters, plus there has to be special character, an uppercase, lowercase, and a number or digit in it. So let's sign up and see what's going to happen. Registration is in progress. And then you see user successfully registered. So now our user is registered. We can now also check out our logcat. And we had errors before that I had to fix, which I did. But now HTTP, let me see. So here we can see that we have registered under our website API account register. So that's cool. And basically we now have another account inside of our cloud database. All right, and now if we check Treblle, we will find we have an account registered. So here I have registered an account and it's to add tutorials EU with a password and password confirmation. So that worked. And also something that Treblle really helped me out with is when testing this application with the user profile, which we're going to build in a bit, I have created a bunch of requests, because what happens if you use Compose, there is a bunch of recomposition going on. And what I had first was the code would constantly make requests to the server each time that the UI would recompose. And this would happen a lot, like every couple of seconds, or every second actually, or so quite often actually. And this would create loads of requests. Now imagine you have a solution which sends out thousands of requests by one user just using the application because of recomposition or whatever. And you wouldn't notice this until you would be broke, because your server would be so expensive because of all of the requests that you're sending to it and so forth. And that's really what Treblle helped me. So Treblle just let me know, hey dude, you are sending requests like crazy. Look at this. Like we have like 300 requests within like 15 minutes, not even, within like 10 minutes or so. So that's not good. And that's what we will fix or solve in the application, or we're going to see a way around it. But basically you see, like that's what we're going to build next. So we have this post request and so forth, but not next. First we need to set up the profile UI, then we need to fetch the user token, we need to save the user token, then we need to prepare the image for upload, and then we can upload and fetch the profile image from the API. So let's do that one by one now. And the first thing that I'm going to start with is the profile UI. Therefore, let's go back to our project and let's make sure that we create a new screen which will take care of the profile image, or the profile itself. So this will be another composable. I'm going to call this one profile, like this. So this will be a composable. So we need to add the composable keyword as well, or annotation, as well as the name of the composable. So I'm going to call this one profile. Now inside of this profile, we basically are going to put everything into a box. So here we need to import box for this to work. And this box will have a modifier, which I'm going to set to fill max size, like this. Okay, so this box will take the entire screen, so to speak, and the content of it will just be a card. And this card will have a modifier. Well, let me import card first. And the modifier will be that it's going to fill the max width, and I'm going to align it towards the center. So alignment center, like this, with a capital C. Now let me get rid of this like that. So then I'm going to add padding to it as well, of horizontal padding, and let me import padding like this. And this will be horizontal with 32 dp. And let's import dp here as well. Okay, so let me put that into a separate row. So this is the modifier for the card. And now actually let me add a shape as well. So I'm going to add a shape property here. Shape should be a rounded corner shape with 4% rounding and an elevation of 6 density pixels, so that we have a little bit of shadow. So now the content of the card should be, first of all, a column, and this column is going to be imported first and then it will have a horizontal alignment, which is going to be alignment center horizontally, and then I'm going to set the modifier to be modifier dot wrap content size. So it should only be as large as the content that it requires to display. And then I'm going to have 16 density pixels of padding towards the top as well. So that's how I want to style the column. Now let's look at the actual content of the column. So in the end, what I want this to look like is something like this, right? So we have this card, then we have the image, we have the username, and then we have the button that says edit profile. Okay, so that's what we are going to build right now. So we have the card, we have the column in which we want to put everything, and inside of it I want to use an image. So let me import image here, and then we're going to set the painter resource, which for now I'm just going to set to r.drawable, and r, well, I need to import r. So let me import r here, import .r. Okay, now we should be able to use it. So drawable.ic launcher background. So I'm just going to use what we have because we don't have any other images now. Then the content description, I'm going to set that to null. The modifier, I'm going to add a modifier to the image, which will be that the size of it should be 200 density pixels. Then it should have a border, which is going to have the shape of a circle, so circle shape, as well as a width of 1, like this, 1 dp, and then a color of white. So color should be color.white. Okay, and then I'm going to clip this. So clip the image with a circle shape. Now let me see what the problem is. This will be still part of the modifier. So let's import a clip here like this. And finally, I'm going to set the background to be of color gray. So color.light gray. Okay, so that's the image, and underneath the image, that's where I want to put a text. So let's import text here. The Compose UI variant, this one. And the text property should just say username. And then we have a modifier, which will be modifier.padding with top of 16 dp. No, actually, let's use 10 dp. A little bit of distance at least for the text. And then underneath the text, I want to have a button. So we add the button for editing the profile and leave an on-click empty for now. So let's import button. And this button should have, actually, let me make sure I'm not importing the wrong button here. So is it going to be, yes, the Android Compose one. It needs an on-click event. So it seems like it didn't import the correct one. Okay, that's the one. And I think now we might have a problem because it doesn't understand which button it should use. Let me see. Image, foundation, layout, color, button. Import button, Android Compose UI, this one. It just doesn't want to add it. Let me get rid of it entirely. Let me see. So if you have this problem as well, it's like super weird. Okay, let's try it again. Button, just this button with an on click. Okay, that should work. That I'm going to leave empty for now. And I'm going to add a modifier here. Modifier, which will be modifier dot with padding of horizontal 8 density pixels and vertical 32 density pixels, and it's going to fill the max width. And this is going to be put inside of the button definition still. So for some reason, it just jumped into the content of the button, which it shouldn't have. So now this is where the content of the button starts. And here I'm just going to display a text, which is going to say edit profile. So that will be how our profile should look like. And if you want to see how it's gonna look like, you need to add a preview here. So add preview, and this one will be an add composable with the fun profile preview. And this will be displaying our profile composable. Okay, so the preview should show the background. So show background should be set to true. And now if we run the application, we should be able to see how our profile is going to look like. And there we are. So this is what we're going to get: the image, username, edit profile. Okay. So that's our profile. Now let's go over to our sign up, and let's make sure that we have the nav controller assigned here as well, so that we can navigate from it like this. And then we need to add the nav controller here at the preview as well. So we're going to pass the remember nav controller here, which is going to be an empty one. And then once we click on the button of registering and we were successful, let's actually navigate. So here we can just say nav controller dot navigate to our profile page. So profile root, and here I'm gonna set the launch single top value to true. So I want to get rid of the page of sign up. So I use pop up to sign up, and then I'm gonna set the inclusive value to true as well. So if you want to know more about them, so for example, inclusive, whether the pop-up destination should be popped from the backstack. So we want to make sure that the pop-up to sign up is going to get rid of. So basically it says get rid of the sign up page from the backstack. So when the user presses the back button, he can't get back to the sign up page. Okay, so that should happen once we were successful in registering. And now we need to make sure that we have such a nav controller inside of our main screen as well. So here you see we have this composable. Well, first of all, we need to make sure that we pass in the nav controller here. Nav controller, so that we can even run from one screen to another. And then we need to set up the second composable root, which will be our profile. And here we need to go to the profile composable. Okay, so let's see. The thing is, we cannot log in yet. We can only register. So let's register with a different account. Hey, one at gmail.com. Password will be 123 AA and at, and let's sign up. Registration and process, and there we are. So now we are on the profile screen. Okay, cool. So now the next thing will be to fetch the user token. So if we check out Treblle now, we will see that we have a new register, which is hey1@gmail.com with the password and so forth. So we just registered with this new user. Okay, now let's set up the user or fetch the user token, because we need that token in order to be able to log in or sign in again and do anything else like uploading, for example, the profile image. All right, so let's take care of the token, and therefore let's go over to our authentication service. So here, as you might recall, we have our post with the account register, and now we need to create a suspend method and annotate it with a post with token as its appended path. So let's just go ahead and set it up, and I'm gonna go over what's going on here in a bit. So this will be a post, and we're passing a token, and then this will be a suspend function, which I'm going to call login user. All right. And this will return a login user response. So before we take care of that login user response, so we are going to pass a couple of things to this login user. So we're going to use @field, and this will be the grant type field, and we need to import field here. So let's do that. The grant type will be a string, and so to this token we need to send the grant type, which will be the password. And then we need to have another field here, which will be the username. So here, this will be username, which will be of type string. And then we need to pass the password as well. So @field password, which will be the password of type string, like this. So now, before we look at what's up here, let's create this login user response, and it is under user. So I'm going to put it in the user file. So here I'm going to create another data class, which will be a login user response. So this will have the access token, which will be of type string. It will be having the token type, which is going to be of type string. Then it's gonna store when it expires, and it's gonna store the username. Okay, so this is the login user response data class that we're going to use. So you see the user class is not only taking care, or file is not only taking care of register user, but also of the login user response. So that's what this login user will return. So we're passing these details, but it's going to return the login user response object. So what is going on there? Well, the thing is, we are using the suspend function login user with the @post annotation with the token as its appended path, and annotated with the form URL encoded. This is because the request has an XWWW form URL encoded added as its content type, meaning the required values will be added to the URL using the @field. So if we look at our, let me open up Postman again. So if we look at our Postman, you might recall once we wanted to send a request here. Well, what do we have one here? Yeah, here the body is of type XWW form URL encode, and here we need to pass the grant type, the username, and the password. Okay, so we have done that before, and now we're using it inside of our Android application. So grant type, username, and password. So why do we call this login user rather than something like fetch token? Well, this is because it will still serve as the request method to sign a user in from the login UI, which we will look at later. So now let's go over to our repository and set up a login user method as well. So here we have the register user, and now we need to have the suspend function, which will be login user. So here we need to pass in the username and the password. And it will return a login user response, which will be set to auth service.login user, with the username being our username and the password being our password. So like this. Okay, so that's our login user suspend function, which we can now use in order to log in the user. Now, obviously we're not fully done yet. So let's look at our main view model. So we had this function for registering a user. Now let's create a function to log in a user. So login user, we need to have a username, which will be of type string, and the password, which will be of type string as well. So now what's up in here? Well, first of all, we will need to have a user token. Okay, so we need to store the user token somewhere. The token is basically a very long string, which just gives, well, authenticates a user. Just says, okay, this is the user that is already logged in and registered and so forth. So let's create a private val user token, which will be a mutable state flow with a resource of type well, this time not nothing, but specifically login user response nullable, which we're going to set to null. And then we're going to set the user token, well, create another variable called user token, which will be a state flow. So similar to what we've done with the register request state. And here this will be a resource login user response nullable. So let's import resources. And now we need to add a getter. So add getter, and this getter will just set the user token, or will just be the user token. So the underscore user token to be specific. So now we can use this user token inside of our login user. So because we are going to set the value of it depending on resource.loading. So first it's going to load, and then we're going to run our view model scope in order to run our coroutine, which is going to be launched on the dispatcher's IO thread with error handler assigned to it. So there we are. Now here we're going to get a result, which is going to take the repository dot login user. So it's going to call this method. And here we need to pass in the username, as well as, and here it seems like I mistyped it. So let me make sure that I'm not doing that. And then the password. So here password will be password. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. We're logging the user in, and then we are setting the result to the user token value. So user token dot value should be resource dot success with the result. So if you recall, in Postman we had this user token which we were getting. So let me find it. It was here when we were authorizing, we had to pass in this user token, right? So whenever we wanted to set the user profile or go to the user profile, you see we had to pass this very long user token. Okay. And that's what we're passing here as well, if we were successful with the connection. Now, obviously, we also need to adjust our error handler, because it's not only taking care of the register request state, but also of the user token. So in case we have an error, we are going to set the value here as well. So resource dot error with the error message. And for some wrapping it, because it's a nullable. All right, now when we're signing up, and let me actually see what the problem is. So here in the main view model, what did I miss? The user token. I need to pass something to it. Do I? No, I don't. That's because I wrote resources and not resource. Okay, so now that we have that, let's actually use our login user method inside of sign up, because once we have signed up and we were successful, we want to log in the user and then we want to navigate him. So here, view model dot, and actually with a capital M, model dot login user, with the username being email state dot value and the password being password state dot value. So if you recall, these states, they were taking care of whatever we entered inside of the, well, I cannot show it here anymore, inside of the register screen. Okay, and now we need to pass the view model to our profile as well. So here, our profile needs to have the view model so that we can access its methods. So view model, main view model. And now we will need to prepare the states and the context and so forth. So let me go to the bottom here, make sure that we are passing a view model to our preview as well. And let me import that. And now let's set up the states that we're going to need, or the values that we need. So we need to know this token state. So val token state. And where do we get that from? We get it from our view model dot user token dot collect as state value. All right. And then we need to have the context in which you can do that. And this will be the local context. So the thing is, as we're using Jetpack Compose here, this is going to be a little different than we would have done it with just this as the activities context. Also, we're using the local context. So whatever context we're in right now. And then we're going to remember the data. So let's remember the data by it being a mutable state of our login user response. So this will be the actual data that we get from logging in. So whatever the response will be. If you look at it, we get the access token, token type, when it expires, and the username that we are logging in with. Now, back in the profile, we need to check the token state, and depending on that, we can display something in our box here. So here in the box, when the token state is going to be resource dot loading. So we need to import resource here. So while it's loading, we're going to just display a circular progress indicator, which is just this a loading indicator with the modifier being modifier dot align. So we want it to be in the center. So I'm just going to align it towards the center. Alignment center. And then if it is success, so resource dot success, then I want to check the token data. So if token state data is not null, then the data value should be the token state data. So the token, the data value is this data here, which is the login user response data. So once we were successfully logged in, that's where we're going to get the token state data from, and we're going to store it in data. And then if it was an error that we get, so if resource.error, then let's just display a toast saying an error has occurred. So I'm just gonna use this error here that says an error has occurred, which is just gonna display on the screen for a bit. So now what we'll need to check, and we'll need to check it before we display the card. So if data.value.access token is not empty, so we do have an access token. If all of that stuff worked, so this stuff here, then we will know that we have something that we can display. And actually, that's where we can then display the entire page. So the card and everything. So let me put that in there. So I cut out the entire card, right? So here, and then put it in this if statement, because only then do I want to display it. And now finally, we can go over to our main screen and pass our view model to our profile page, because it also now needs a view model as we have set it up here, because, well, that's where we get the user token from and so forth. All right, and then one thing that I realized that I missed, and that is here to use the add form URL encoded, because as I showed you in Postman earlier, it has to be well, it has to be this part here, form URL encoded, this part, and that's what I missed. Okay, and once we do that, we can run our application and see if we can actually register and be directly sent over. Actually, let's use the token to do something else, and that is to display the username directly. So we're not going to load the username from the sign up screen itself. We're going to load it from the token. So here in the profile, we get the access token, right? And if it's not empty, we're displaying this card, right? This card here. So I want the username to not just be this username text, but I actually want it to be the username that is the user that is logged in. So we get that from data.value.username, which will be the data here, .value that has the access token as well. Okay, and at this point, let's run it again and see if we can actually register and stuff. So I'm going to call this one test2, I think. So I'm really like using all kinds of values here already. Doesn't really matter. Add Gmail, and then this one will be something. Okay, and sign in. Registration in progress, and there we see we are now logged in as test2@gmail.com. Okay, so the login process itself works now as well. So the next thing that we need to do is to save the token to the preference data store. All right, so now that we fetched the token, we need to save it locally using the preference data store. The preference data store is an API that's for saving small values to the device in form of a key value pair. That is that the key will be an identifier to the value it holds, and the reason we are saving this is because we don't need to fetch user tokens every single time that app is opening up, as the token doesn't expire immediately. We can see the issue date and the text expiring from our okay HTTP response. So here you see it expires on Wednesday the 29th. Okay, so we have like 2 weeks for our token before it expires. And now let's set up the preference data store dependency in our project. So therefore, let's go over here and let's make sure we have the data store made available here as another dependency. So it's going to be this one here, Android data store preferences 100, and let's sync it so that we have it in our project. So now let's go over to our data folder here, and let's create a new file, which will be a class that I'm going to call preference store. Actually, let's make it a file. So preference store, and this file will first of all contain a context.data store, and we need to import context for this. Let's do that. And this will be of type data store preferences, and we need to import data store once again here by preferences data store, with the name being store user. All right, so here preferences, this one here. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to create a class here, which will be our preference store. And I'm going to pass the value, which needs to be of type context, which is why we created this context. So we set up the context, and now we will be able to use the context. So first of all, I need to store the token key, which I'm going to create a private variable for, token underscore key, which will be a string preferences key, which will be token key. And then I'm going to create another one, private val email key, which will be a string preferences key called email key. So we're going to use those as keys for our key value pair that we want to store permanently on our data store, which means permanently on the device, so that we don't need to log in every single time. So now let's create a token pref for this, which will be of type flow string. And we need to import flow for this, which will be Kotlin X coroutine flow. And then this will use our context data store data.catch. And here, in case we get an exception, and let me see what the problem here is. So context should be this context here. So, and we have context, we have data store, we have the preferences, string preference key, preference data store, and we have flow. So what's the problem here? Yeah, the empty space. Okay. And now we need to import catch. And now what we will want to do here, well, we're gonna get an exception, right? And this one here, exception, inside of catch, another empty string or empty missing here, exception, like this. So if the exception is an IO exception, so an input output exception, then emit the empty preferences, and otherwise throw the exception. All right, and this needs to be mapped. Map with preferences that we get. We need to import map here for as well. So the preferences are going to be preferences at the position of the token key that we had set up. And if we don't have one, we're going to use an empty string. Okay, so that's how we can set this up. So basically, by default, the data store uses coroutine and returns flow values, so we can create a variable to return the token value. First, we use the catch method to check if there is an IO exception while reading the value and emit an empty preference. Else, we throw any other exception that might occur. And if there's no exception, we map the value and return it. So that's what we do right here. Okay, so this will be the token pref. And now we need to do the same thing with the email pref. So val email pref, which will return a flow string. And this will also use context.datastore.data.catch with an exception that will be returned to us. So actually, let's do the same thing here. Let's run it like this. And the only difference will be that we're not going to use the token key, but the email key. So this will be the email prefs. And now we need to set up our suspend functions, which are going to help us to save those tokens. So suspend func save token, which is going to require a token of type string, and then it's going to use the context data store. Now we're going to edit the token because it might change, right? So edit, let's import edit. And then here we get a user token, and this user token should then be stored at the token key. So whatever the token that is passed should then be stored and edited. So we're overwriting if it exists, and if it doesn't exist, then we're creating it. This is to save the token, and now we need to do the same thing to save an email. So save email, and this will get an email, context data store, and this time we get the user email, and we set the email key to be the email that we're passing. All right, so that's how we save the email, and that's our preference store class that we can now use. And preference store, yeah, I think that's better. Okay, now inside of our repository, we can use our preference store. So here, let's actually pass it to our repository. So val preference store, which will be of type preference store. And then down here, let's create a token pref, which will be type flow string, and it will use, well, let's import flow, and it will use our preference store dot token pref. Okay, so we're using flow here, which is a coroutine, well, an asynchronous data stream that sequentially emits values and completes normally or with an exception. Okay, so we've used it before, but just so you're aware what this is. And then let's create a suspend function here to save the token. So we're gonna pass in a token of type string to this method, and then we're gonna use our preference store to save the token, and here token, with the token being the token that we are passing to the save token method. And now let's set up the same thing for our email. So we need to have an email flow, and val email flow will be of type flow, which will be of type string preference store dot email pref. And we will create another suspend function calling it save email. And we need to pass the email of type string again. And now we can use our preference store dot save email method to set the email to be whatever we pass as email. Okay, now in our main view model, let's go ahead and create a save token method. So fun save token, which requires a token of type string, and then we can use our coroutine scope to launch with a little bit of delay. So let's say after like 500 milliseconds, let's use our repository to save the token with the token that is passed to us. Okay, so that will be our save token method. Now we need to do the same thing for our save email method. So let me copy this and now replace this with email. Here, this will be an email. And this will be save email. Okay. And now we create a setter to hold each preference value. Okay, so private val pref token, which will be a mutable state flow, where we create a pref token method, which will be returning a state flow type string. And what it's going to do is it's going to run a coroutine where it's going to launch our repository dot token pref collect. So it's going to collect the token, and it's going to set the pref token variable, so this private pref token value, to be it. All right, and it's going to then return this. So here, return our pref token. Now we need to do the same thing with the email. So let's set that up. Pref email, which will be the pref email with a state flow of string. It's going to collect the email flow, and this will be the pref email here, value to be set to be the pref email, and returning that as well. All right, and now we can go over to our profile, and I'd say at the very top where we have our token state, we can now remove the data variable and collect the preference values from the main view model. Okay, so here what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the token to be view model dot pref token dot collect as state dot value, and the same goes for the email. So view model dot pref email dot collect the state dot value, and this will then be used now. So now you see we get errors here. If resource was successful, we check the token state data, and instead of writing the data here now, we're going to use our view model to save the token. So here, view model dot save token to be the token state dot data dot access token. And we are going to use the view model as well to save our email with the token state dot data dot username. So the token state has these properties, right? And you see here the token state will be of type login user response, where we get the access token, token type, when it expires, and the username. And we're just using that. Okay, so if the token state data isn't null, we're going to use all of that. And we can also log it while we're at it. So we can log and import it, log D, where we're going to say token et, and that's going to be token state dot data dot access token. Okay, so now if the data here, basically access token is not empty, here we need to replace this with the token not being empty. So if the token is not empty, then we can do all of that stuff. And at the same time, we need to change the data value username to actually just be the email. Okay, so that's this variable that we created, this view model pref mail collect as state. Okay, so at this point, let's see if we can still run our application. And actually, I missed something, and that is in my main activity. And it will also be in the sign up. So first of all, in our main activity, we will need to set the service as well as the preference store. So preference store will be a new preference store that we need to set up. So private val preference store, which will be created lazily, so only once it's required. And this will just be a preference store using this as the context. And then we can use this preference store here. That's one problem. And then the other one is that in the sign up screen, let me see, I actually need to make sure that once I have the email state all the way up here in my column, we need to also set up the token pref. So here, let's create token pref, the view model dot pref token dot collect the state value. So this will be the token preferences, and we can check if they aren't empty. So it's not empty, then we can directly navigate the user to the profile. So the user doesn't have to constantly like log in and stuff. We're going to send him to the, or register. So far we always had to register directly, even though we were registered already like 100 times, but that's how we're going to get around it. Okay. We're going to just say, go directly to the profile page. Okay. And make sure to pop up to our login. Okay. And this will be inclusive. All right. So now let's run it again and let's see if we need to register again or directly get sent over to the profile screen. Okay, so let's register one last time. Test 4 or whatever it was at gmail.com and then sign up. And there we are. So let me now, actually, let me check. I have the app somewhere, right? So I call it Treblle demo. So let me actually close it and open up the Treblle demo. And you see, we go to the profile or the register screen, but then we are sent over directly to this screen where we can then see our profile. And now we can take care of editing the profile next. Okay, so that's it for this video. And now, or this part of the video, now we're going to take care of preparing the image for an upload. All right, so now that we have our profile screen, I want to edit the profile, meaning the profile image, and send the data obviously to my API and so forth, or use my API to send the data to my server, better said. So in order to achieve that, we first of all need to have the permission to even use the gallery, for example, to change the image, to load an image from our own phone, for example, right? In order to achieve that, let's go over and first of all, make sure that we are using the accompanist permissions dependency. So let me show you. So it's this one here saying implementation Google accompanist or accompanist permissions 0.2.1.1 beta. Okay, so that's the version that we're going to use for our, I'd say, pretty new application, in the sense of we're using Jetpack Compose, which doesn't even have everything yet, and we're using a bunch of betas, as you see, but they still work, so that's good. Now let's make sure that we have the right to read the external storage inside of our Android manifest. So here we need to add another permission, users permission, and that is going to be the read external storage. We're not going to write anything, we're just going to read. All right, and now let's go ahead and set up the permissions inside of our profile screen, because we are going to require them here. So after we have the token and before the box, I'm just going to create a permission state. So val permission state, here state is going to be remember permission state. And this remember permission state needs a permission that we need to assign, and we can get it from our manifest class inside of permission, and there is this read external, and let me make sure that I have permission imported. Let me see what's up here. So, okay, closing bracket, manifest dot permission. Does it use the right manifest? It uses the Java manifest. Holy smokes. So if that happens, this makes me almost angry at what they are doing here. Like seriously, if I'm using the permission in an Android application, how likely is it going to be that I'm going to need the Java util jar manifest? Well, actually, I'm going to use the Android manifest, that one. And then suddenly the permission exists. So the permission class, and now we can access the read external storage permission. So let me put that into a different line or a separate line. And this will be my remember permission state with the manifest permission read external storage. So what's the problem now? Oh yeah, well, it's an experimental permissions API that we're using, so we need to annotate that. So here, add experimental permissions API. So we're using the latest and greatest technology, which is still experimental. So that's what this permission state is going to allow us to do now, to get permissions. So now we need to get the URI, so the location of our image. So let's call this image URI, which will be a mutable state of a URI that I'm going to set to null. And this will be a URI nullable, like here. And let's import URI in order to allow this. And here, get value and mutable state of needs to be imported as well for us to be able to use the remember keyword, because I think we haven't used it here yet. Okay, now we create a launcher to open the gallery expecting a result, which will be the image URI. So once we click on this button, we want to launch the gallery, and we're going to do that by using the launcher. Remember launcher for activity result is what we're going to use here, and we need to pass in the contract and on result. So what should happen as the contract, and I'm going to use the activity, let me see, activity result contract plural get content. All right, and then this get content actually needs some additional, so let me put that in a different line. So here, this get content will be closing here, and then we don't need the onResult. But what we want to do is we're going to use the URI here, and actually URI, this one here. So we're going to get the URI as a result, and we're going to store that inside of our image URI. Okay, so that's how we're going to set up the launcher. And now let's just log the image URI while we're at it. So let's tag it image URI and log it as this message. Now, as you will see, we have this bug now here at the bottom because we need to add this experimental permissions API to the preview as well. Otherwise, this just doesn't work. All right, now let's edit the profile once we click on it. So here inside of the if token is not empty, which is inside of the box. So in the card, we have this to do, which we now are going to take care of. So once we click on this button here, edit profile, we want to do something. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check for the permissions. Do I have the permission to even do something? So I'm going to check the permission state has permission for our launcher.launch, and like this. And the input will be image star. And let me add the star here. So if the permission should show rational, then show a message to let the user know that the permission needs to be accepted. If not, launch the request for permission. So if we have permission, then launch. If we don't have permission, then should show permission rational. Okay. And here we're going to say post.makeText. Please give us read storage rights. Otherwise this won't work or so. Okay, so here I'm going to use this toast where I'm going to pass the context and a little text like this. This will be my toast. And then in the else case, so if none of this is the case, that means that I will need to ask for permission. So here I can use my permission state that we had set up earlier. Permission state dot launch permission request. Okay. So that's when we click on the button, right? Now let's go over to our main screen. And not the main activity, but main screen. Do we have it open somewhere? Doesn't seem like it. Well, let me go to main screen KT. And here you see that the profile doesn't work because we need to add experimental permissions API for our profile to be accepted inside of the main screen. So pretty much on every single page we need to add this. Now we need to add it inside of, let me see, our main activity as well there, because the authentication now also wants to have that. So here we are using it. So let's add the experimental permission, which means we need to also add it here for our onCreate, which means we need to add it here to our preview as well. And then we can go ahead and create a utils file or object, which I'm going to conveniently just put into the root folder of our project. And I'm going to create an object here, which I'm going to call utils. So our utilities, where we just create functions that we want to use throughout the app or so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say bitmap to base 64. So you have seen what this base 64 means before, right? We need to import bitmap for that. Let's do that. And the thing is, in order to now convert a string into a bitmap or the other way around, we will need to set up a code here. So this will return a string. This will make a bitmap into a base 64 string. Okay, so here we need to create a byte output stream. So this will be a byte output stream and the array one. Then we need to compress the image. So compress with bitmap dot compress format being JPEG, and we can set up the quality. I'm going to set that to 50, and we need to assign a byte array output stream. Then we can go ahead and set the image bytes, which will be a byte array, Well, we're going to set that with byte array output stream dot to byte array. And then finally, we're going to return the base 64 dot encode to string image bytes with the base 64 default settings. Okay, so this is basically how we can convert a bitmap to a 64 or base 64 string. So do you recall how we used this tool where we then decoded a string into an image and the other way around? So that's basically what we're going to do. Okay, we're converting a bitmap to a string because we don't want to send a bitmap to our server, but the string itself, because that's how we set up our database and server. So now inside of our profile screen, we need to set up the bitmap. So here where we set up the log just before the box, let's go ahead and set up the bitmap object, which will be of type bitmap nullable because I have nothing that I can assign to it at this point. So I'm going to make it null, and let's import bitmap. And then I can use my image URI and check if it's empty, and then set the bitmap depending on the build version that we're using. So if we're using an older Android version, which means an SDK int less than SDK underscore int less than 28, and let me import build here. If we're using that, then use one approach, and if we're not using that, then use the other approach. Okay, so here we're just making sure that this is going to work on newer and older Android devices. So here the media store dot images dot media dot get bitmap, and we need to import media store. Let's do that, and image, and let me make sure that I have the right one. Either way, let me just finish this line, context dot content resolver with it. So whatever the it from the image URI is going to be, so the link that we get. So now let me just see if I import the right one. Come on, where's the image? It's trying to do this one here. Let me check. I just realized that it's images. Okay. So it's media store images, media get bitmap, and then the else block. And by the way, you see that it's crossed through, which means that it's outdated, but it's fine because we're only using it for outdated Android versions. And here, otherwise, we're going to use the image decoder to create a source based on the content resolver. So content resolver with it. And then we're going to use an image decoder to decode our sources bitmap. So whatever the source is. Okay. So basically, we're just making sure that we now have the image set up, where we convert the image URI into an actual image. And then inside of our column here, where we are actually using the image, instead of using the image from the painter resource, what we can do, well, actually here, let's first of all just set up the bitmap dot let, and we get a bitmap, and we take it to create the image URL, and then we convert it to base 64, and we can log that as well. So we're going to say base 64 image URL is going to be it. And what we want to do here is we want to, for now, just be able to even select an image at all. Okay, that's the goal for now. We're not storing it yet. We're going to store that next. But for now, we want to see if we can even like assign an image here. So bitmap, btm, image URL. The thing is, the image itself is not being changed yet. But let's see if we even get to the permissions part. Yeah, we get there. So let's allow it. Let's edit the profile. Let's select an image, and we have no images here. So let's just create an image with our emulator. Let's take an image with the camera. So let me rotate and click on it. All right, and now let's select that image. Okay, so now let's go over to our logcat and search not for a KHTTP, but well, this is the image that we get. This is the base 64. So let me see. This is base 64. Let me just search for base 64 to only get base 64. So let me see if I can copy this all the way up to here. It should be. And now we can go back to the converter and enter it here. And there we are. So it seems like it's breaking it down into multiple parts in my log because it's just too long of a log entry. Because if you look at it, that's where the second part starts. So let me cut that out as well, all the way up to here, and paste it at the very bottom. And then decode, and you see we get a bigger part of the image and so forth. So we're always just loading one part of the image using this, or at least that's what we're getting in the logcat. All right, so that's it for this part of the video. And the next one we're going to, or the next part, we're going to look at how to upload and fetch the profile image from the API. All right, so now it's time to actually upload an image, or user profile to be precise. So, or user profile image. So let's go over to our authentication service right there. And here we need to have another post request. Okay, so I'm going to copy this post request that we created earlier and going to override it now. So instead of using a token, I need to use the user profile or send the user profile. But we need to change the API here. So this will be API.API path, which needs to be added to the post request. Then we're going to use the form URL encoded once again, and this one will be called add user image. So the fields that we need to pass is going to be username. So this one will be and the fields that I'm going to pass is going to be username as well as profile image, which will be an image URL of type string, or I'm going to call it image URL of type string, and I'm not going to assign a value by default. And then we have authorization, which is going to be the key that we need to pass as well. And it's not going to return a login user response. So this is going to be our method here that we can now use in order to pass an image. Or better said, post an image. So now that we have this method, add user image, we also need to set it up in our repository. So let's create a suspend function, add user image, where we need to pass the username, the image URL, and the key, like this. And now inside of it, we're going to use our auth service and pass the username to be the username, the image URL to be the image URL, and the key to be the key. All right. And now the same thing goes for our main view model, because as you might recall, that's where we save the email, save the token, and so forth. So here we also need to add the user image here. So add user image with the username, the image URL, and the key. All right. So here I'm going to again use a coroutine to launch it on our dispatchers IO thread with the error handler. And inside of it, we're going to use our repository, add the user image with our username, the image URL, and the key. All right, so now this by itself will not be enough. I need to add a delay of 500 milliseconds so that this doesn't happen again and again and again, because otherwise this could happen quite often. We could try to add the user image very often. So what we're saying is do it and then delay for 500 milliseconds. And now in our main view model, we also need to adjust our error handler here. So the error handler is now also going to have to take care of the user image. So let's go ahead and create a user image, private val user image, which will be the mutable state flow, similar to what we did here, where we make it a resource of string nullable with a null as a value, and then we have a getter here for our user image state flow of type resource string nullable. And obviously we need to add the getter, otherwise this won't work. So this will be the user image like this. All right, now we can set that user image inside of our error handler. So here the value should be resource.error with the error message for unwrapping it. Okay, now in the profile KT file, at the point where we get our bitmap, that is inside of here, where we get our bitmap and we get the base 64. So this is where we need to set the image. So we use our view model to call our add user image, and here we can set the username to be the email, the image URL to be the image URL that we just created, and the key will be the bearer with the token, like this. So let me put that in the next line. So here you see we have this image URL that we get from the bitmap. Well, yeah, exactly. So bitmap to base 64. Now at this point, we also need to have a method to get the user profile, because when we load the page, we also want to be able to get the profile. So here add get, where we need, well, get with a capital ET, okay, the one from retrofit. So here we first of all need to enter the path, the API path, like this, and then user profile, like that. And then this will be a suspend function called get user profile. And what it's going to require is going to be the query for the username, which will be our username of type string, and the header, which will be authorization. So we need to also authorize. Okay, and this will be a key, or I'm going to call it key. And then this will return a string. So this get method will return a string for us. This will give us the user profile, so the details about the user. And we're searching for the specific username, and we're passing the authorization so that we can get the details, so we can load the data, so to speak. Now that we have it in our authorization service, so in our retrofit service, we need to set it up inside of our repository as well, and then in the main view model. Okay, always the same procedure here. Suspend func get user profile with the username and the key, and this will return a string, which will be auth service dot get user profile with the username being the username and the key being the key. Okay. Now inside of our main view model, let's set that up as well. So here we are adding the user image and now get the user profile. So func get user profile. So here we need the username and the key. And what is it that we want to do? Well, we want to run a coroutine once again with our dispatchers IO thread. Dispatchers IO, including the error handler, so that we get an error handler. Well, we get the result of it if there is an error. So we're going to store the, well, actually, let's have first a delay of 500 milliseconds here, so that we cannot run this method again and again. And let's get the result being repository get user profile. That was the method, and we needed to pass the username and the key to this method that we've just set up. And then we can use that to store it as the username value. So resource dot success with the result. And this shouldn't be username, sorry, this should be user image, obviously. Okay. So whatever the result is, we are going to get that and store it inside of the value. So whenever we get the user profile like this with an R, then we will be able to store it inside of our user image. And now when we add a user image, let's also set the user image. So get the user profile with our username and the key. So the thing is that when we initially built this solution and we didn't put those delays in, our Compose or Jetpack Compose would just reload the UI. It would load it and load it again and again and again. And what that would do is it would do a lot of work or put a lot of stress onto our API. So you can see we have 263 requests just testing this, because it was constantly just creating another one and another one and another one. So here, like you see 2 hours ago, there were plenty. And here you see like 21 hours ago, like we had so many reruns. It was just going crazy. Okay. So we want to avoid that. And therefore we added these delays. So now we also need to go to login user, and here once we get the result, we need to add a delay here as well of, let's say, 500. Then we load the user token, but I'm going to add something here, which will be user token.value .data.access token nullable. So if we get something there, if all of that is not empty, that's why all of the question marks there, then we're going to save the token. And we're going to do the same thing with our username. So this was the access token, and now we can do the same thing with our username. Let and save email here with it. All right. So now inside of our profile, we can get our user profile. So where would be a good spot? Well, outside of any of these methods, let me see. So this is, I think this is still in the box. Let me actually put it on top. So here we have all of those variables. We have the bitmap, and before we are in the box, even on top of the image URI if we want to, that's fine. So here we can use our view model, and then we can get the user profile here, passing the username, which will be email, and the key, which will be bearer token. And I have to write that correctly, otherwise it's not going to work. So this will be the bearer token. So now we move the token state from the bin, well, from being a global variable into this box to stop continuous recomposition. Okay, now we need to move the token state from the, well, it being a global variable into this box to stop continuous recomposition, because that is what created a bunch of our problems. So we can check here if token is empty. So if token is empty, we're going to get the token state, which will be view model.user token.collect as state dot value. And then we check the token state. If it is resource loading dot loading, then I want to display the circular progress indicator in the center of the screen. So modifier dot align towards the alignment center. All right, and then else if the token state is successful. So here token state is resource success. Then I want to check the token state data if it's not null, and save the token there and save the email. So view model dot save token with the token state access or data dot access token, and the same goes for the view model dot save email with the token state dot data dot access, well, the same is username, not access token. Okay. Which is basically what we did with this when token state here. So instead of using this when here, let's get rid of it. We're using our if now, if check. All right, and now inside of our box, so if token is not empty, or inside of the cart, there we have our column. And inside of this column, let me see, that's where it starts. I'm going to check when val image result. Yeah, we had that. Image result is going to be view model dot user image dot collect as state value. So here we're checking for the image result from our view model user image. So our main view model here, this user image, we're checking for that. And then we can get the resource success. So if it is successful, then we will check if the image result is not null or blank. So here data dot is null or blank. Then we're going to get the image result data dot base 64 to byte code dot let. Okay, so let me see. Base 64 to byte let, which is going to be a method that we're going to build ourselves. So we need to convert this base 64 string into byte code. So let's set that up real quick here. So fun string, this will be in our utils file, dot base 64 to byte code, which will return a bitmap. And here what we need to do is we will get the decoded string, which will be a base 64 decode with this dot substring of our index of, where we separate by a comma, and go one step further, and this comma has to be inside of a string like this. So let me put this in a separate line, and then we need to say which setting we want to use. So I'm going to use base 64 default here. And then we can return a bitmap factory decode byte array with our decoded string with an offset of 0 and with a string length or size like this. Okay, now we can use that inside of our profile. This should be good now. We need to import it, however, so let's do that. All right, so if we can convert it into code and the thing isn't empty, then we can create an image, which will be, let me see, do we have it somewhere already? I think we don't. So this image is going to use the as image bitmap as the image from our so from our bitmap that we get, we make it into an image or into a bitmap. Then we need to set the content description for each image, and I'm just going to set that to null, and I'm going to modify this image to be with a size of 200 density pixels, and it should be with a border of having a shape being a circle shape. Let me put that a little higher up here. Circle shape, then a width of 1 density pixels, so the border should be 1 density pixel wide, and a white color. All right, so this will be the border, and then I want to clip the image to make sure that it uses a circle shape so that it's not going to be square. And I'm going to set the background of it to be light gray. So the color should be color.light gray. And this will, let me see. So it becomes quite complex here because we have a lot of code here, right? So I really need to make sure that we have everything. So first we have our token is empty check. Then we check if the token is not empty. We create a card with a column which starts right here. So here, let me push this back like this. Oh, it just deletes it. Come on. Okay. So that's where the column starts. And then we check for the image result. And after that, we have our text here. So we don't need this image anymore, which we had before we, well, actually, I could have just overwritten this code. But we have this bitmap let, okay? And let me actually put this somewhere else. So we have our button, our modifier, all of that good stuff. And let me put the bitmap in here. Okay. All right, and at this point, let's run our application. But before I do, let me check if the time is correct, okay? Because my emulator really tends to break and not work because of the time not working correctly. And whenever you work with retrofit and the time of your emulator is set up incorrectly, it's not good. Okay, so we're directly logged in, but we're not displaying the image yet. So let me see why that is. So now it seems like I was shadowing something. So this token state was shadowed because we had a global token state, which I'm going to get rid of because I didn't want to have it globally anymore, which is exactly what caused the problem of us generally rating like hundreds of requests. So you can see here earlier we had 270 requests and now we have 622 requests. So let's track that. And that's really where Treblle comes in and really helps us out, because it just shows me, hey dude, you're just creating loads of requests for nothing. And that's what I really appreciate about Treblle. So now if we go over to our authentication service, I had a big error here where I used the field of authorization field, but it should actually be the header. So I should send the header as authorization. And then the username, you see here, I used a username with a capital U and here with a lower U. and so forth. So I should stay consistent with it. So the username I'm gonna use with a lower U for all of them, as I have when I logged the user in. Okay. So this will now fix the problem of the application not loading the profile image at all. But the problem is a little deeper. So let's run the application. Let's see. So I have another user here. Let me run Treblle and edit the profile. Let's allow that. And now select an image here. So the dog, for example, you see the dog image is loaded. But if I look at the requests, I will see that I'm generating loads of requests just doing that. Okay, so the user profile, this is the image, okay? But you see I'm accessing the user profile a few seconds ago, so I'm accessing it a lot. And that has to do with Jetpack Compose recomposition. So after a user registered, we can see more requests than we were supposed to have, and this is due to the request depending on state values, which causes recomposition. So a state value is changing all the time, right? Like for example, our token and so forth. And recomposition in Jetpack Compose means a change in data causing the UI component to be called again, therefore calling the methods again. So now we need to move our login request. So in our main view model.kt, what we can do is, for example, instead of using our registered user, we're going to use the username directly here, which will be of type string, and the password, which will be of type string. And then we will need to create a register user variable, which will be a register user object that we created earlier, where we need to pass in the email, which will be the username, the password, which will be the password, and the confirm password, which will be password confirmation, which will also be just the password. Okay, so I'm not going to create an extra variable for that. So then the register request state value can stay as it is. The new model scope launch will now do the same thing, and we are registering the user with the register user as we did before. But now what we need to add here is we need to add a delay. So I'm going to add a delay of 500 milliseconds here as well. And then I'm going to log in the user with the username and the password. Okay, so that's where I'm going to call this login user. Okay, so in the sign up composable now, within the sign up button, so this button here where we register the user, this is the sign up button, right? That's the text of it. We now need to make a change. So here we need to now pass the username and the password confirmation and so forth. So instead of creating the register user as we did before, we can just go ahead and pass all of these details directly to the register user method like this. And this will be the username will be email state, and this one, how did I call it? Password state. Let me see, actually, let me get rid of this entirely. So we need to just set the password to be the password state value. Okay, this should be fine at that point. So then when registration is successful, there's no need to call the login method. We just navigate it directly to the profile screen. So when register state, we have this toast when we're loading, and when we're successful, we currently logged in the user again, which is not necessary. So that's the problem. The sign up would constantly call this method again and again, and we would just create so many different requests each time. So let's get rid of that. So now let's run the application, and actually before we do that, let's close the current application. Also make sure that we go over to our app and we clear the storage and clear the cache and everything. And now let's run the app and let's register. So let's track our requests. So we have 1000, let me see, Nobody else is hopefully working on this right now. So we have 1,192 requests. So now let's register reg 123, whatever, an @ sign has to be in there if I ever find it. And then let's sign up. So the signing up has worked. So we have this account now. You see, we just generated 1 plus another 2 requests. So the account register and then the 2 user profiles. So then this was trying to load the image and loading the user profile. But then if we run the selection of an image and we set it up, so now we have added the image. You see the user profile generates a couple of requests. So here we upload the image and then it loads the user profile once again. And these are the requests that we have here. Okay, so that by itself works already. That's good. That's the amount of requests that we were expecting. But now let's say we close the application and we open it up again. And then that's where it loads the profile. Let's see how many requests we get there. So you see there we have a problem still. So it loads loads of requests. So it loaded, I think, like 20 requests or so. So that's something we have to still fix. All right, so let's do that. In our profile composable, where we're calling getUserProfile, here, viewModel getUserProfile, what we need to do is we need to wrap it in the lifecycle. So it's only called in onResume. So wrapping the lifecycle in the disposable ensures that once we leave the screen, the observer is cleaned up. So let's do that here. Val lifecycle owner, which will be a local lifecycle owner dot current. So we're going to take that one, and this will be a disposable effect that we're going to use here. Key one is going to be our lifecycle owner, and the effect is the actual code that we want to execute. So here, the code that we want to execute will be to, first of all, have an observer, and the observer will be the lifecycle event, lifecycle event observer, this one here, where again first we get one variable that we're not going to use, and then we get the event, and then we are going to check if the event is going to be lifecycle dot event dot on resume. And here you see that you can access the different lifecycle events like on resume, on pause, and so forth. So if that's the case, then I want to use my view. Actually, I just want to use this code here. So let me not write it once again. So that's what I want to do in there. And then outside of this if statement, I can then use the lifecycle owner to add the observer with the, add the observer that we just created. So observer, this one here. And it seems like we need to put that outside of where we created the observer, like this. So then if we do that, we need to also run the onDispose. And here we're going to remove the observer. Okay. So now the getUserProfile will not be called again and again, because that's the thing with composables, right? They're getting recreated, recomposed, and so forth all the time. And then also within the add image method, add image, and I think I called it like add image like this, which was in a different file. So that will be inside of the main view model. Okay, here we had our add image. Where's that? Add user image, where we also called get user profile. So we don't need that here. So now once there is a change, the one in the lifecycle that we just created inside of our profile here will be executed. Basically, we're saying check only for the lifecycle events and only run it when the onResume method is actually being called. So now let's try it again. Let's run our application and let's check. So we have 1661 requests. Let's close our application and run it again. And after a bit, we see our profile image and we see we get run request here. Okay, so that's pretty much what we were expecting to get. We get our user profile once, and that is exactly what I wanted to achieve with my application. Okay, so that's it for this part of the video. All right, so now let's take care of the login screen. And this will be very similar to what we had in sign up. So let's go ahead and create a new screen here. Kotlin file, and this will be a login. Because we want to be able to log in once we are in the application, not just register, right? So this will be a composable again, add composable. And this will be fun, login. So it will also need the nav controller so that we can navigate, and it will need the view model. All right, so then what do we want in here? Well, we will need to have the toggle state and those other states from our sign up as well. So let's put them in here. We will also need to have the token. We need to know whether we are logged in or not, right? The token state. So let's go ahead and create a token state here, which will be using our view model. Wait, let me call this one view model like we've done before. So view model dot user token dot collect as state and value. All right. So this will be the token state. Now we will need to set up the user interface of our login screen, and it will be pretty much like our sign up screen. So let me copy everything up to this row here and put it in there and add another curly bracket. Okay, so this should be fine. Now it should look pretty much the same, email address, but then password state. Once we click on the button itself, so here, instead of using register user, what we want to do is we want to log in user, okay, with the username and the password. All right, and then here underneath, what I'm going to check is if the token state is that we're loading, so is resource dot loading, and here this needs to be imported. So if we're loading, then show the circular progress indicator. And if we're not loading, and specifically if we are in the success state, so token state is resource dot success, then I'm going to check the token state data. Actually, let me see. Success. Okay, yeah, it's not going to be the same as we've done there. So token state dot data is not equal null. If that's the case, then we want to save the or use our view model, this one here, to save the token and save the email. So token state dot data dot username and view model, once again this one here, dot save token with token state dot data dot access token, and then we can navigate. So here we can use our nav controller to navigate to our profile. So here navigate to profile. Now this profile does exist, but our login doesn't exist yet. So here we're going to do the same thing where we launch single top, and this will be sign up as well. Now the row that we have here with this text should be clickable. So I want to be able to move from this screen to another. So where we set the padding, let's make this clickable as well, like this. And then in here, we're going to navigate to sign up. So here, sign up. Okay. And already have an account should be don't have an account. And this one should be sign up. Okay, now in our sign up, we want to be able, once we click on this text here, so this has to be clickable as well. And we need to be able to move to this other screen. Okay, so in sign up, we need to basically do the same thing. Let me copy this here. We need to navigate to login. All right, that should be fine. And now in our main screen, we mustn't forget to move over. So main screen KT, we need to add the composable here, composable called login. And it should lead us to the login with the nav controller and the view model. So here nav host controller and the view model being the view model, which is this view model and this nav host controller. All right. So now let's run our application and see if we can log in. If we are already, or if we already have an account. So by default, we will be, well, we still have our application running, but now let me go over here, open the app. Well, obviously I'm registered, so I need to clear the data. Once again, oops, app info, clear storage, and then run the app again. And here, go to the login screen. Isn't clickable yet, so let me see why that is. So we are on the profile screen, no, on the sign up screen, and we want to be able to click on this row which contains the two texts. Well, that's because I didn't set up pop-up to. So I set that to login now, and let's run it again. And now you see we can go over, and then we can go. Okay, we should change also on the login page. We should also change the button content. I think it really makes sense to say a login. All right. Okay, so I created an account now. This one at gmail.com, and then the password. And this is the registration process. It shouldn't work. An error has occurred because I was on the sign up screen. So now once again, test 1, 2, 3 F. Right now, let's log in. And there we are. All right, so the login also works. All right, and that's it for our little application here. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Now you know how to set up an API using ASP.NET, as well as consume the API using a Jetpack Compose front end or an application that is using it for a profile screen as well as the login and register screen. So there were a bunch of things that you learned along the way. If you enjoyed the video, then now is a good time to hit the like button if you haven't done so already, and subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. And if you want to learn a lot more about programming in general, definitely check out our other sub-channels that we have. So we have an Android sub-channel or app development in general sub-channel. For now it's just Android, but in the future there will be Flutter as well as iOS development, so check that out. And then we also have a C# channel, really recommended. And we have a bunch of courses. So if you feel like you want to really invest into your career and learn a lot more about it, about any of the topics that we're covering, then definitely check out our courses. You can find the link in the description below and you get a huge discount. And obviously, a big shout out to Treblle.com. Thanks a lot for sponsoring this video. It took us more than 10 days in total, I think, in order to prepare this. So thanks a lot for them to making this possible. So definitely check them out, register there and use it for your API tools that your API applications that you're going to build in the future and your projects, and recommend it to all of your friends while you're at it that are also developers. So thanks a lot for watching the video. You're still with me after almost 4 hours, quite a long video. And yeah, have a nice day and all the best on your journey as a full stack developer.